All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by my friend and the always interesting Bazed Lit Analyzer. How you doing today, brother?
Hello, sir. How you doing? Good to see you.
We've got
a special film that we're covering tonight. I'm so glad we could do this together. So I'm looking forward to this breakdown.
I am too. And for anybody asking why it looks like we're getting ready to go hunt aliens as men in black, it's due to this timeless classic film. And you can't watch it, but notice how dapper and classy everybody dressed. And so I thought it was only apropos for our film review.
Yeah. We're gonna be talking about our boy here, John Foster Kane, right? And this one is a special movie. I mean, it's I'm glad we're doing this one because I think the last film that we did was maybe around Christmas time. It's time to get to Citizen Kane. It's time for a based review of Citizen Kane because it's considered, by many to be the greatest film of all time. So we're going to talk about what that means, I'm sure. And shout out to everybody out there. I hope everybody's having like the guy on Instagram says, a wonderful weekend out there. We're in the cafe. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have a wonderful weekend. Whatever you're doing out there, go out there and get it, right?
Yeah, it should be a good review because it is a timeless film. I actually had not seen it. I know a lot of people in the live chat saying, "Oh, I hadn't seen this film." You reached out to me. We hadn't done a film since our review of Home Alone 1 and 2, I think was the last one we did. Our annual Christmas movie review. We've done that, I think, 2 or 3 years in a row now. But you reached out and you said, "Hey, have you seen Citizen Kane? We should do a review on this." I was like, "No, I've heard of it." And then I pulled it up. I was like, "Oh no, I've seen and I've even seen clips of it." And obviously the famous Rosebud of him dropping the snow globe. I saw that, didn't know exactly what it was all from. So just watched Citizen Kane in preparation for today's review. And I got to say, it is a timeless film. Some people in the chat were asking, well, is it worth seeing? I think it is worth seeing because the lessons that we're going to discuss are timeless, and it's so contemporary. And obviously, given the dominance of Donald Trump in the news, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about this. This is actually one of his favorite films, and even though the main character isn't exactly a beloved figure, Donald Trump said that he does see Charles Kane as himself. And so very interesting, very interesting. We're going to do a full breakdown as usual and go scene by scene. But anything you want to say? I first want to talk a little bit about the greatest films of all time before we got going. So anything you want to say before we dive into that?
Did I say John Foster? I was thinking of Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles, but it's Charles. You're right. It's
Charles Foster. Yeah, Charles Foster Kane.
When I was rewatching the movie this most recent time, I said aloud, I bet Donald Trump loves this movie. So I Googled it, and the first clip I came to was my favorite movie is Citizen Kane. It's a wonderful film. It's very good. It's my favorite. But it's funny because the question they asked him was like about, the economy. So, and he went into a riff about Citizen Kane. And so, wonderful film. We love that. Charles Foster Kane. Yeah, I think it's going to be good. Yeah, but like you said, it's a good thing to start with. What does it mean that we have the is what people consider, critics usually consider, the greatest films of all time? And one thing that's amazing is how much, just in reading about Citizen Kane, that how much the critics and sort of academia has, how much those things have decided what is a great film and how much they push it, and that it's for the public to, the movie going audiences to be influenced by that and sort of consume movies. Because the story with the making of Citizen Kane is interesting. It didn't start off with a bang. It wasn't a
Right.
huge movie. It had a lot leading up to it. But then another interesting element is the fact that the determination of what the public thinks is part of the storyline of the movie. And then the movie and the making of the movie and its reception was actually mirrored the movie itself.
Mhm.
So William Randolph Hearst was heavily involved in trying to crush the movie,
Right.
which is like the same thing by extension that happens in the movie. So we have, and in the movie, we have a framing device where we have like a movie within a movie within a movie. And then on the outer layers, we have people talking about the movie and the making of the movie. And so what happens, I should call it the picture, right? Because when you ask, when they ask the great, film directors, like when they ask Martin Scorsese what they think about it, he's like, I love this picture. This is a picture. I love this picture. And I think that what ends up happening a lot of times with the analysis of the movie is that people only discuss the making of the movie and how Orson Welles came to it instead of the movie itself. So I'm glad that we're gonna get into that. I think it
Absolutely. Yeah.
deserves that.
That was one of the interesting things as we'll get into. Charles Foster Kane, the main character of the movie, is an incredibly wealthy guy, and we're going to lay out, so it's all going to make sense here in a little bit. But the sort of main theme is him owning a newspaper and utilizing media at first for righteous purposes, and then it becomes more corrupted as things go forward. But uh, what I thought was so interesting is William Randolph Hearst actually would not allow this film to be published in any of his newspapers, which again, as you said, sort of reflects the dynamic that we see in this film itself. So
Yeah,
very interesting. But before we
yeah,
get into it, and we're going to talk a little bit, we'll give you a quick overview of the movie. I first want to talk a little bit about, because this is considered one of the greatest films of all time. What are some of the greatest films of all time, and what are the greatest grossing films of all time? And so maybe you can speak a little bit about to the Sight and Sound greatest films list. From my understanding, this is one that a lot of critics consider one of the most accurate listing of the greatest films, and Citizen Kane is number 3 here, um, and it's number 2 amongst the directors poll. And so we
yeah,
see this French film, never seen it. We see Hitchcock's Vertigo. We see then Orson Welles' Citizen Kane film, a Japanese film. The newest ones is 2020 or 2001, David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, and in 2000, In the Mood for Love, which
mhm,
is a Hong Kong French film.
yeah.
Um, but anything you want to say? I know Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, that has come up multiple times when I was going through multiple different lists of some of the greatest films of all time.
Yeah. Yes, Stanley Kubrick's movies are interesting because they kind of mirror. There's a big parallel between Stanley Kubrick and James Joyce in terms of their the art that they produced, the limited amount of art that they produced, and how, just like James Joyce on the list of the 100 greatest books, his books are, two of his books are in the top 10, three of them are in the top 20. And it's the same with Stanley Kubrick. All of his movies are in the top 100. And that's different from somebody like Martin Scorsese, who is prolific with movie making and has a lot of films that are outside of that spectrum. But with Orson Welles, I mean, the thing about Orson Welles and Citizen Kane that's unique is that, unlike I think any of the other films on this list that I can think of right off the bat. This is his first movie.
Yeah.
It's 1941. He's in his early 20s.
Yeah.
This is his first movie, and I'm going to get into how that came to be and what it means in terms of, when they talk about the great directors of all time, and really they should do a poll of the great cinematographers. Um, Oftentimes we're going to have a mix of popular movies and art house films. And the thing about Citizen Kane that's interesting is it comes before most of those. It comes before the 60s French New Wave movement, which really influenced a lot of later directors. But there's one thing about Citizen Kane that is pretty common amongst all those things, which is that number one, it's a mix of an art house film and a mainstream film. It's a
Mm-hmm.
perfect mixture of the two. And in terms of its technicality and how movies came to be made after this is the movie. So there's a lot of parallels in my mind between this and Apocalypse Now. I consider Apocalypse Now to be the greatest movie of all time, and not just
Oh,
because it's my
really?
favorite. Yeah, not just because it's my favorite, but because I think it's unique. And when people say stunning and brave, I mean, unironically, that movie is that. It's I think that uh, Orson Welles won a bunch of Palme d'Ors at the Cannes Film Festival, which is often a marker of films that will become great after time.
Mm-hmm.
But Apocalypse Now, when it won the Palme d'Or, Francis Ford Coppola was awarded the Palme d'Or, and he was asked about the movie, and he famously or infamously now said, "My movie is not about Vietnam. It's not like Vietnam. It is Vietnam,"
Mm.
which is a pretty audacious thing to say. But the movie holds up, and when you watch, I remember when I watched that movie for the first time when I was in 10th grade after I read Heart of Darkness, and I went, "Oh, this is where all these things come from." Like when I watch movies about war or with voiceovers or with sex, drugs, and rock and roll mixed into a weird war type of surrealism, it all comes from this movie. It's totally innovative. But
It is.
Citizen Kane it has the same feeling to it. You're watching a movie and you go, "Oh, this shot right here," even if you don't care about film. Like there's a scene. One more thing. There's a scene at the end of the film where we're looking at all of Kane's possessions in his castle, and we sort of we pan out and we see the amount of stuff, and that's you watch it and you go, "This is where Spielberg got this for Raiders of the Lost Ark." Like this
Mm-hmm.
is it. This is the same shot in the warehouse, right? When we see
Yep.
the box, and then we see the amount of stuff in which is hidden in plain sight. It's just taken from that. So that's just one example. But yeah, I think that in terms of the lists, they often fluctuate. Citizen Kane was pretty solidly one for about like 50 years. And then recently Vertigo has been placed at number one in terms of different lists. We have this one, we have the AFI list, the American Film Institute, a
Yeah, I
bunch of
want
different
to
ones.
pull that one up. I got it pulled
Yeah,
up right now. Here is the AFI greatest movies
yeah.
of all time or last 100 years, and it has Citizen Kane as number one. And I got a couple quick videos we'll watch as well from AFI, both of them. One is multiple filmmakers talking about why they believe it's the greatest film of all time, and then one specifically by Scorsese. But just looking
Yeah.
at this list, I've seen Casablanca, I've
Mhm.
seen The Godfather, I've
Yeah.
seen Gone with the Wind, I've seen Lawrence of Arabia, I've seen The Wizard of Oz. I was surprised that I hadn't watched Citizen Kane.
Mhm.
But what's kind of your thoughts on some of these greatest films of all time? Schindler's List, I've seen that one. Singing in the Rain, I've seen that one. It's a Wonderful
Mhm.
Life. We actually covered It's a Wonderful Life
We
last
did?
Christmas.
Yep.
Um, but all these films are incredibly timeless.
Yeah.
What's your kind of thought on this list that we're looking at right here?
Where's Apocalypse Now? It's like 28. It should be like 28. It's
Uh,
usually down there
yeah,
somewhere.
wow, you nailed it.
Oh, it's 28. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of the top 10, you can see the top 10. Casablanca is usually a firm two, and then one is Citizen Kane or The Godfather has been I would say that in terms of modern cinema post Citizen Kane, The Godfather's probably number one. This is different from IMDb. If you go to the International Movie Database, anybody, which is where I like live most of the time when I'm looking at movies, a lot of the top 100 movies, those are fan favorites. Or if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, there's sort of two different categories, and those will veer off. There's a huge gulf between fan and critic favorite movies. Um, I think that what's common about most of the movies, especially in like the top 50, are that like when you look at right there, number 63 says Stagecoach, 1939.
Mm-hmm.
Stagecoach is a John Ford movie, but the cinematographer was Greg Toland. He's the same guy who is the cinematographer, director of photography for Citizen Kane. Uh, and it's an early movie. It's black and white, but it's essentially just the hero's journey, but set out in the Wild West. It's John Wayne's in it, and these movies, like Lawrence of Arabia, for example, they're landmark, timeless movies. And the thing to consider about these things is that when movies were made in the old days, especially pre-cable television, there's a completely different mindset dealing with movies, and that's one of the things that's instrumental in terms of Citizen Kane's popularity. Because, for instance, a movie that comes out now is instantly accessible everywhere.
Right.
So determining its popularity and even its box office, and that's also changing the box office because we're seeing the box office itself go away. Now it's just numbers according to a Netflix subscription. So
Right.
it's a totally different metric. But The Godfather, for example, was like a huge cinematic event. Gone with the Wind was re-released like 6 times in the next 15 years. And so that's all box office. And then when cable television and when Ted Turner made TNT and showed movies 24/7, that brings movies to a wider audience. But again, one of the things with Orson Welles was that he specifically told he put it in his will that he didn't want Ted Turner. He said, "I don't want Ted Turner touching my film with his dirty crayon hands," because Ted Turner's thing was that he was colorizing all the old movies, like for a wider cable TV audience. And Orson Welles said, "Don't touch my movie, right? Leave it black and white." Can you imagine? It
No,
would ruin the film. That's
it would.
the whole point is that it's black and white. It would be like colorizing the first part of Wizard of Oz,
Right.
which completely destroys the theme of the movie. But yeah, I've seen The Third Man right there. Number 57, that's Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton. It's the same cast as Citizen Kane. Um, a lot of these are old. We have a lot of influential musicals right there. Number 10 is Singing in the Rain. Yankee Doodle Dandy was number 100. Wizard of Oz counts in that. That's Judy Garland. Yeah, there's 100. Some of these are important because the 47's Taxi Driver. That's important because it's Taxi Driver and Clockwork Orange right there. Stanley Kubrick are probably the most, in my mind, the most in terms of like postmodern movies because of the way that the anti-hero came about. It's a psychopath who is now like looked on favorably. One of the great themes about Citizen Kane is that, and we'll get into this, is that Kane is essentially he has elements of psychopathy. He's
Right.
a sort of an empty vessel. But the thing is that you are not, you at no time during the movie do you like root for him in a way. You don't really go for him. You're just watching this thing and you're sort of aware there's something off, even though he's presented as the hero. And that's part of his narrative arc within the film. So,
Right. And we'll again, we're going to explain everything about Citizen Kane in just a few. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is when you compare just people's opinion on the greatest films of all time, it's very different from the greatest or highest grossing films of all time. Now, Gone with the Wind is still number one, almost $2 billion after adjusted for inflation, lifetime gross. But Star Wars, Sound of Music is up there, E.T., Titanic, Jaws, The
yeah.
Exorcist. Avatar, if you go on like Wikipedia had Avatar as the highest grossing film of all
Mhm.
time, but this list is much more accurate.
Yeah, it's
Um,
because when Avatar came out, movie tickets were $20, and when Gone with the Wind came out, they were like, "Hey, 2 bits to see a movie, huh? It's 1 penny."
yeah, right. But one of the things I thought was so interesting when you go to the highest grossing films. Now, this list is a little bit more accurate, but often many of the more popular ones, like if you go on Wikipedia or whatnot, it's all these huge Avengers films, X-Men, Avatar, Superman. And it's like, are any of these films going to be remembered or considered some of the greatest films of all time? Probably not. And it kind of shows you the different angle in which films were created. Like when we go through Citizen Kane, despite it being uh, out in 1941, the message, the themes are so contemporary. You can totally take it away. You can apply it even to today, whether it be propaganda through the utilization of newspapers. You know, we already know that the media lies to us constantly, and so it's so timely and it's so relevant. And you think of the movies that they make now, these big blockbuster hits, and it's not really about a message. It's about lights and glamour and explosions and graphics. It just seems like there's such a different uh, take and angle on how they're developing films now compared to the way they used to be.
Yeah, Have Gun Will Travel says, I love the creepy guy from Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon, little guy with big eyes. He's talking about Bogey, Humphrey Bogart. Well, I mean, look, the point is, that's funny. The point is that one of the things about these guys and earlier movies is that we have men, you know, there are men in the movies. Humphrey Bogart is by all, I guess, I mean, he's an artist, he's in movies, but you have men in the movies, and I can't think of a movie where he doesn't exhibit a sort of manly trait in the movies. It's kind of like Clark Gable. I mean, it's like you've got guys who are totally alpha the rest of the movie versus Kung Fu Panda 5. Right, which is like billions of dollars in movies. When it's okay if Toy Story is the very popular movie because it's for kids, and people are and it makes a lot of money. I mean, look at Home Alone, right? Home Alone is a movie for kids, but the difference is that Home Alone, as we covered, Home Alone has heavily Christian overtones in it.
Right.
It's allegorical, and it also is. Not only is it nostalgic for adults who were kids back in the day, but it's like you said, it's timeless.
Mhm.
Avatar is not that. Avatar is completely. First of all, it's completely escapist. But the real insidious thing about something like Avatar is like, oh no, this is what they want to make the world into, right?
Right.
They send DARPA to the exoplanet, and they want to, it's talking about G side, So this is totally different. Citizen Kane is a real character study, and it's a completely unique way of changing the way it completely changes the way it makes. Okay, Citizen Kane elevated the art form of cinema.
Right.
Rather than being something that's purely populist or purely escapist, or like you're going to see the theater. You're not going to see theater anymore. You're going to see a movie, and movies have to be different. They have to be something else. And it's really the camera that changes that. And Orson Welles, sort of by accident and through exploration, like developed this thing where the camera is the eye. And we change the way that we see the world. And
Right.
that's what movies are supposed to do. Toy Story 33, it's not going to do that.
Right. Yeah, I had a few notes, and then I want to play the two videos to kind of introduce the film to everybody. These were some of the notes. I was just reviewing like the sort of impact uh, Citizen Kane has had and how
Yeah.
it's been reviewed over time. And these are kind of what I put together. The first one is the technical innovation and the narrative structure. Again, this was done by Orson Welles in 1941. I believe he was 23 years old in 1939 when he was allowed to take this from the stage and put it into a film. So imagine that you're 23 years old and you work with one of the most prominent film producer or production center. Was it RKO?
Yep. Which was
RKO.
later bought by Howard Hughes. Yeah.
Yeah, and they basically let you do what you want with your film at 23 years old. So then 2 years
Yes.
later it comes out, and its innovative use of cinematography, which is very noticeable. That's what I noticed. It's a nonlinear structure. The narrative structures, the special effects, which were revolutionary at the time. Wells and cinematographer Greg Toland employed deep focus photography that kept objects in the foreground and background simultaneously in sharp focus. The narrative structure is equally groundbreaking. The film is eschews from a more of a traditional linear storyline for a non-linear. It's constantly going back and forth, Um, and this mosaic of perspectives creates a more complex and textured understanding of the protagonist, Charles Foster Kane, and allows the film to explore themes of power, corruption, and isolation. That's kind of the big takeaways I took from it. And
Yeah.
then the sound design and music. Let me just
Mhm.
go over here so people see what we're talking about. The sound design in Citizen Kane is another area where Wells kind of pushed the boundaries. The film used overlapping dialogue, a technique now common in films, but it was innovative at the time in 1941 to create a dynamic and more realistic auditory experience. And there's multiple scenes where it almost feels chaotic because there's so many
Mhm.
voices that are coming through your speakers at the same time, and you kind of feel like you're in the midst of this chaos. And additionally, Bernard Herrmann's score, his first for a film, is subtle yet impactful, enhancing the emotional depth of the narrative, setting a new standard for film music. Cultural and social impact of this film. Citizen Kane is often interpreted as a critique of the American dream, showcasing how wealth and power can actually lead to alienation and the loss of personal integrity, which we're going to highlight. The character of Kane is loosely based on the real life figures of William Randolph Hearst, serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of media magnates. And the film's release was mired in controversy, particularly because of Hearst's attempt to suppress it, which, as I said, he wouldn't allow any mentioning of the film in any of his newspapers or publications. And then the critical reception and legacy, I have that while Citizen Kane was not a commercial success at first at its release, its critical reputation grew rapidly. It challenged and changed filmmaking, influencing generations of directors and becoming a staple in film studies due to its style, structure, and themes. It frequently appears atop the list of the greatest films of all time, which we've already said, including the American Film Institute's rankings of Sight and Sound poll. And in academic circles, Citizen Kane is studied not just for its technical and aesthetic innovations, but also for its role in shaping the modern film industry. Again, just highlighting how influential this film actually is, and has been a catalyst for discussions about authorship, the commercial versus the artistic value of film, and the power of dynamics. So this film, if you haven't seen it, and even after today's review, we're not going to give anything away. I think it's still worth watching. You know, some of the films, like
Yes.
we'll say after we do a review of it, you know, you kind of get the gist. You know, the spoilers already out of the bag. So if
Yeah.
you want to watch it. If you don't, but this one, I think, is something that even after we're done today, you could go watch it tonight and be like, wow, that's a pretty good film. Yeah, I can see why that's important.
Yeah, I would say that that's a lot to be said about a film in the context of other movies. Other movies and what we come to how we come to talk of them about them, if at all. Think of this is what there was I went to a teleconference with the poet laureate one time in when I was in high school, and he
Uh-oh.
explained this about literature.
Name
Where we have
dropping.
oh yeah, yeah, my personal friend, the poet laureate. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and
Yeah.
yeah, my close personal friend that I
Yeah,
asked
we
one
were
question
smoking
of.
cigars
That's
and
right. Yeah,
playing lawn
yeah,
darts, and
yeah. Robert Pinsky. No, he said that.
after a badminton session, we decided to chat.
Oh, we had an an excellent session of badinage, back and forth. Um, but he said that when you look at literature in terms of different the spectrum of literature, you can talk about various genres of literature. It's the same with film. You can talk about an action movie, a comedy, but really there's only two kind of circles that matter. If you're looking at it on a chart, and the big circle is bad movies. Most art that's produced is bad by any way of measuring that. It's just trash, and that's okay. Sometimes really bad movies can be fun, but then there's a small circle which is good. Good movies are great, and that's what eventually becomes the canon of film, the canon of literature. And Citizen Kane, I think, deserves. People should need to watch this for a number of reasons. All of the different things that you just said about the film, but what it boils down to, I think, is that if you're a if you're a serious person in terms of the way that you look at the world, and you're a thinking person, if you have any sort of criticism of the way the world works, or you want to look at things with a critical eye at all, art is a conduit for that, and film is one of those things. And you should watch this movie. It's so multi-layered, and whether it almost becomes sort of a moot point of whether you enjoy the movie or not. It's that it has something to say, and it says it.
Right.
And just one example of that you just mentioned was the different characters talking about the film, and it produces a varied effect on the way that the audience determines who Kane is.
Right.
Well, that's reflective of real life. It shows us something that we have in real life, and not in terms of a realism. It's not naturalism or realism. It elevates it to something about high art, which is that when we think about people, especially people we don't know, figures that we don't know, oftentimes we think about them in terms of, we sort of absorb subconsciously things that other people have said about them, their opinions.
Right.
And so critical thinking means we take those things, we hold them objectively, we weigh them, and then we sort of synthesize them and come up with our own determination. And the movie does that.
Right.
It shows us how to do that without telling us how to do it. So I think it's important.
Yeah, that you get that feel throughout the film. I'm going to play these 2 quick videos, and then we'll start to really do our deep dive into it. But as we'll discuss, one of the themes is that after, the beginning of the movie is really the end. It's Charles Foster Kane is dead, and his last words is Rosebud. And now these journalists are hunting to try to figure out what the meaning of Rosebud is, which they never come to the conclusion of. But in that process of trying to figure out who Mr. Kane was, it's constantly going to different people and asking their opinions about him. And then it's that nonlinear thing where you're kind of always going back and forth on his lifetime, his storyline, and you get different perspectives of who he is. And he's a complicated person, but the general themes is that, money is isolating. We'll talk a little bit about that because I have some themes written down. So we'll dive into that as soon as we get in the film. But before we do, check these out real quick, just so you guys kind of get a feel for everything we just said and why it's been so highly praised. And then we'll start doing our deep dive. Rosebud.
Citizen Kane is the most important, greatest American film as far as I'm concerned.
This is the gold standard here.
It's pretty hard to top Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made.
Is that really your idea of how to run a newspaper?
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Fetcher. I just try everything I can think of.
There's never been a film that I'm aware of that if you watch it for the 138th time, you can still see something new that you hadn't noticed before.
I made no campaign promises because until a few weeks ago, I had no hope of being elected. Now, however, I have something more than a hope. And Jim Geddes has something less than a chance.
Every single, not just every scene, but every shot has an idea. There's
All right, so that's Sidney Pollack. That's Sidney Pollack talking.
Executed at every.
So the people they've showed, if people don't know, that's Sidney Pollack, who played the character of Ziegler in Eyes Wide Shut that I just covered. Sidney Pollack is a great director. We also had Richard Dreyfuss. Citizen Kane is the greatest movie of all time. We start off with William Friedkin, who did The Exorcist, and William Friedkin just died. We're going to get Scorsese and Spielberg. But one of the things to look at in terms of the highlight, even just looking at the highlights of the film here, the first scene that we saw, like you said, I mean, it starts off with his mouth and he says this word like it's a code phrase. and then we see the dropping of this snow globe. But look at his hand is almost transparent in that scene. No, you can't. Nobody done this sort of thing before. Like the camera work was just straight up looking at it. And even the scene with the politician right there, you can't help but notice not just Trump, but any sort of world leader mimics this. They have this kind of body language and, arms out wide, bringing in the audience and then bringing them in close, right, when you're looking at the podium. So it's just interesting to see what these people talk about.
Yeah.
Of that film.
There's this extraordinary performance which people seem to take for granted. I mean, Orson ages from 25 to 85 in this movie.
That's Peter
and
Bogdanovich.
It's totally believable in every phase of it.
Rosebud.
Orson Welles was brilliant. I mean, and that was like his first film, and he was 26 years old.
It is just one of the great movies ever made, and I think many people are going to agree. It's just one of the great American experiences.
Throw that junk.
I just realized something. Can I say I just realized something? I just realized that Rosebud on the sled and burning the wood right there. We're gonna get to what it's about in a minute, you guys. Rosebud on the sled right there, and with Rose is probably where Jim Cameron that influenced him to have Rose floating on the piece of wood at the end of Titanic. It had to be. It had to be, at least subconsciously, that had to be an influence on him right there.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right, let's finish this real quick, and then we'll hear Scorsese, and then we're going to get into our review.
Or another way of looking at the world through the cinematic eye. When I really discovered what a director does, that is, I saw Citizen Kane on television for the first time. And I began to become aware of editing and camera positions. And what I guess happened there, of course, is that what he did, Wells, was literally, he was not afraid of being self-conscious with the camera and making self-referential remarks with the camera and literally letting the audience understand, as the camera is looking through the floor up into the ceiling. Wells did this, and he did it with such conviction and with such brilliance that you began to realize, I see the camera moves. And I began noticing camera movement because he used that wide-angle lens a great deal. And if you use a wide-angle lens and you move quick enough, you see the walls speeding past you, And this is what I think Wells brought to cinema, to American cinema particularly, because up to that time, it was the seamless film, in a way. The hidden camera, the camera that you couldn't tell was there. So Wells was the one to really open up the Pandora's box of cameras flying up in the eye. In a funny way, I guess, picking up where silent films left off. The odd thing about the picture, and I've seen it countless times, the enigma of it is Kane itself, Kane himself. You don't know him. You can't get to know him. He's afraid of knowing himself. He's afraid of letting anything out that might be indicative of his feelings, his emotions. And he's not passive though. He's not passive, but he's got this wall up that how many times I've seen the picture, I cannot get, I can't really feel for him as much as I did in the beginning. But in the beginning, when I first saw the film many times, I was feeling more for Orson Welles himself acting in the film. I liked him personally.
Okay.
Told you would say picture.
Yep. Okay, so now let's kind of introduce the film to everybody and give them a sort of overview. I guess I'll start and then you kind of fill in wherever you want.
Yeah.
So the film is really about, as you've already kind of picked up, this guy named Charles Foster Kane. He, as we're showed, is this incredibly wealthy man. The film begins with him dying and him saying the word rosebud and dropping the snow globe. And this sets this cascade effect of journalists coming in, trying to, the nurse tells them that this was his last words, and then they're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And they highlight that he was an incredibly influential man. He met with Adolf Hitler. He met with the wealthiest families of Europe. He knew all the U.S. presidents. He could sway an election based on his support or non-support of a candidate. He had immense amount of money. He lived and died in essentially one of the largest castles that words couldn't describe. He had as many statues and collectibles from around the world, more than anybody on the planet. And then we see the film is these journalists are trying to figure out what Rosebud meant. And so we find out that he's been married twice. He has his first wife, we'll find out, is the niece of the president of the United States at the time. He then has an affair on her and, quote unquote, falls in love with a singer who really turns out isn't that good. And he, kind of about a quarter into the film, it flashes back to him as a child. And we find out that Charles Foster Kane did not grow up wealthy. He actually inherited all this wealth, and he was living a very humble life in Colorado with his father and mother. And a gentleman who is kind of looking over the estate that he's getting ready to inherit his mother signs this all over. And so at the age of 5, he then has to leave his mother and father and essentially assume this role of going to become the wealthiest man in America. And so he goes to boarding school, and then we kind of catch up with him. Now he's in his 20s. We find out that he's been kicked out of all the major universities, be it Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell. He's been to all of them. He's got kicked out of all of them. And he decides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a newspaper. And his estate is run by a Jewish man named Mr. Bernstein. And Mr. Bernstein's always kind of cautioning him, oh, don't do that. That's not going to make a lot of money. Do X, Y, Z. And and that's where we saw that little clip in the opening video where he says, I don't know anything about running a newspaper. I just do whatever I like. And so he purchases the New York Daily Enquirer, and he wants to begin his mission as a young man is to have the most truthful newspaper. He wants to speak for the people that don't have power. He wants to give them a voice. And in the competition of making it the most circulated newspaper in New York, he sees that the Chronicle, the other competing newspaper, it has almost 500,000 circulation, where his is like 64,000 circulation. And so with his money, he just buys the board that runs the Chronicle and forces them to work for him, making his newspaper now the biggest one. And he has this close friend from college named Jedediah. Was it Jedediah Lehman or
Leland? Yeah,
Leland. That's it. Jedediah Leland. And Mr. Leland is about the only one that will actually speak truthfully to Mr. Kane and tell him like what he thinks and what his thoughts are and kind of bring him back down to life. And he worried when he purchased the board of the competing newspaper. Mr. Kane thought he's going to make them like his intentions, but what he was more afraid of is that he's going to succumb to their intentions and become more like them. And that's essentially the theme of the movie, is that Mr. Kane, as he grows in power, he has all this money, he can purchase and do anything his heart desires, that he actually becomes less charitable. A big theme of it is that he wants everybody to love him, but he's incapable of loving somebody else because everything is circulating around his interest and his desires. This is why all his personal relationships fall apart, and he dies surrounded by his opulent wealth in a castle, and yet nobody's there because nobody actually cares about him as a person because he can't actually form real relationships. And so some of the main themes that I take away from the movie is, one, the money is isolating. And this is a quote that actually Donald Trump referenced this movie of why he loves it so much, is that he said, Donald Trump identified with Charles Foster Kane, even though, again, he's kind of the, not the most likable person when you watch the film. But he said the reason why he identified with him is because he also agrees that money is like a barrier, and it's almost like a shield, and it does become more isolating. And that is the general theme. Like, one of the things that you see is the first marriage with his wife. He adores her. He's looking into her eyes, telling her how beautiful she is, and she wants to spend more time with him. But every evening he's going over to the newspaper because he wants to have a newspaper that does news 24 hours a day, as opposed to the newspaper that he purchased, the New York Daily Inquirer. They only focused on verified stories. So they didn't do gossip. They didn't do rumors. They didn't focus on drama. They wanted to be the most informative newspaper. And as he purchased it, even though he had all these great high intentions, what happens is he wants more gossip. He wants more drama because that's what's going to sell more newspapers. And so in the evening, he doesn't even spend time with his wife. And you see the relationship, again, distancing. And the way that the film portrays it is even how close they sit next to each other. And you see that it begins, they're right next to each other. He's fawning over her. They just got married. And yet he's more engrossed in his business. And then in the movie, they begin to sit further and further apart. And it ends with his second wife, again, sitting in his castle. She's bored to tears. She's doing puzzles throughout the day. She has no friends. And he's sitting on the opposite side of the room, which, again, in the way the film portrays it, it's a ginormous main room inside of a castle, basically. And he's sitting on a throne. And she's telling him, Charlie, I just want to go back to New York. I just want to do something. I want to have friends. I want to do something fun. And he's like, we're going to go have a picnic. And she's like, I know, but I want to do something fun. We're going to have a picnic. And you see that he can't accommodate to the desires of somebody else. He forces his wife to do what he wants because he thinks it's what's best. And the film portrays it as how far apart they are when they're communicating.
Yeah, all great points. Can I? Somebody dropped a super. Let me read this real quick.
Yeah, I got a couple of super chats too.
Okay. Before I get back into what you were just saying, you made awesome points, especially about the spacing. Daniel Patrick drops $5 and says, FYI, Mike from Red Bar is streaming live right now and showing leaks exposing you for being in defeat. Other freaky stuff. Hope it's not true. I think, I'm not Quentin Tarantino. Like, what are you talking? I think you got the wrong dude. I don't know.
No, he's a troll. I think he's just having fun. Yeah, he did that to me. I didn't even know who Red Bar was. He said that he hacked into my compuber and has all my web browsing history and my text messages. He was going to expose me. I was like, all right.
I mean, I broke my toe. I broke my toe the other day.
Other than your hammer toes. Now, once we find out they're painted, I'm a little bit worried.
That's the secret to Charles Foster Kane. It says painted toes. That's weird. No, thank you for that $5, DP. Appreciate you, Danny.
Yeah,
Patrick.
and Kristen, shout out to Kristen. She threw $5 over on the Dono chat and says, I hope you guys review the new movie Sacred Alaska. I will drop a link in the screening. I'll drop a link to the screening dates, times, and locations in the chat. Thanks, guys. All right. Well, I think one of the movies that just came out that I know I want to do with BLA is Civil War, which today is the first day it's out in theaters. And so hopefully, potentially, we can even do that next week because that is a lot of propaganda and predictive programming, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Vagisil threw in $1 and he said, Kane keeps looking for love in all the wrong places, just like famous TikTokers of today. Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. I don't know Red Bar. All I know is Mersh talking about Red Bar. That's all I know. What were you saying? I mean, I think my thesis for this movie, which I think is something that critics often miss, is the element that we all here watching this know, which is that what I think Orson Welles, or what the movie is showing us, is that this is really a study of an elite in the psychopathic tradition. And it shows how, not just a look into his life, but what it really shows us is how we think about them. And so, like you were saying at the beginning of the film, it's framed. And so it's a perfect example of dramatic irony. We know from the very beginning of the movie that he's going to die. That's it. We already know it. So we know the end of the story. And then in true like meta fashion, we're told about Kane from newspapers, and it reads like he wrote the headlines before he died. It reads like all of the newspapers are Kane newspapers, like they would be Hearst publications, and he's writing his own obituary in the headlines. I mean, it's crazy. It's like reading Franz Kafka's Wikipedia, which seems like he wrote the Wikipedia. It starts off like Franz Kafka was the most handsome man in the world, right? It's like a 5-year-old wrote this about himself. But what's really important here is that we see when we get into his life that, like you said, he grows up in Colorado, and it looks like it's like 1870. 1870 is like we're getting into the Franco-Prussian War. We're in the middle of the Victorian era. We're in simple America. And when he's living on like a farm with his mother and what looks to be like an alcoholic father, they discover gold on their land, and then they make a deal with the bank to sell to manage the money from the gold. And then what the mother does, which is interesting and sort of ambiguous, is she basically sells her child off to the bank so that he can be put into this American prep school tradition. And this is this is a great example. There's not many other movies that show what this really is from such an early stage. So this is the American version of what happens in Britain. You have a royal or a noble or someone with a title. And of course, they send their child off to boarding school at age 5. And then they go off to the elite schools, and then they're going to go run the empire. Well, this is one example. This is the reason that he is a foster child to the bank, Charles Foster Kane, is that this is supposed to represent the American spirit of he doesn't go west, he goes east. It's the opposite, because he's going to subvert the natural order of things in terms of the American spirit. He's raised poor, and he gets a shot into the elite through happenstance, through gold. And he goes off to a boarding school. And then that's one of the things that drives the whole movie, is that somewhere along the line, there's the reason the snow globe breaks at the beginning of the movie is because it doesn't just represent a loss of innocence, or that this was Kane chasing the time when he was happiest. It's that the snow globe represents his world. His world is he looking at his world, and that's what his world is. And it just gets bigger and bigger until it's empty, just like the snow globe. And so he has no motherly. The last time he had any kind of motherly love was when he was a 5-year-old.
Right.
He has the sled in his hand, and he hits the banker with the sled that has Rosebud on it. He escapes his abusive father, but who knows what happens to him when he goes off to boarding school. And when he goes off to school, he gets kicked out of his schools. He becomes bad, and his entire business model is essentially to tank himself by having newspapers publish things about companies that he has a vested interest in, which is very Musk. It's very Elon Musk. He did that with Doge. I mean, this is something people do. And it's like, the whole point is that he's controlling opinion. He's forming a world around himself because and this is probably the key to the whole movie, is what Leland says when he's interviewed. He says, the man just wanted love. He wanted to absorb love, but he didn't really know what love was. He just wanted he thought love was attention.
Right.
Because he was taken away from love, and he's given no attention, and then he's given all the attention, and that he just consumes.
Right.
But he has no love to give. He literally probably doesn't have any idea what love is.
Right.
He doesn't have anything to give back to people. Like you said, he wants to give a picnic.
Right.
And where he has to hire all the people, the friends, to come to the picnic. So he's empty. He's totally empty.
Right. And being divorced from his mother, I think that's one of the key takeaways there in regards to the concept of love, is that he, as an adult, wants to be showered in love. He's obsessed with the public opinion viewing him in a positive light, yet he himself cannot love anybody else because he's obsessed with his own desires and his ambitions. And even the desire to get the people to love him, or he's going to have this truthful press that's going to challenge the narratives and speak for the lowly man, the working class man. That's not really his intention. Again, the intention is to receive the adoration of other people. It's not ultimately the principle. And we see this because when he says that's what he's going to do, and we'll see it when we click through the movie itself, he makes a declaration of principles with his friend Jedediah
Yeah.
Leland. And the declaration of principles are all these things that he's going to utilize his new newspaper for, and yet it gets subverted right away. And Jedediah, when it was going to the presses that they were supposed to print this off into a little box on the front page, he said, I want to keep that original copy. So they brought it back to him, and he sends it to him years later because they eventually have a falling out because Mr. Kane is not the man that he was when he was 25. He's something totally different, and he totally is divorced from all these principles that he set out for. And again, just like we've talked about spiritually and theologically in regards to pride, and that being the ultimate recapitulation of the fall of Lucifer, is this worship of self, is that's exactly the case for Charles Foster Kane, is that he really does idolize and worship himself, and he thinks that by getting people to perceive him in a positive way is somehow of him acting in a loving way. It's not, because it's always self-serving. And so, like, one of the things that highlights is the Spanish-American War, is that it was basically going to be it wasn't going to happen, but because Charles Foster Kane decided that it'd be beneficial, he used his publication to actually initiate the war. And so it highlights that throughout the film, is that I think there's a quote by his friend Jedediah Leland that says he was a brutal man, but he himself didn't act brutally. So he didn't brutalize people himself, but he was so brutal in the pursuit of his goals and desires that he would do anything for it. Although he himself wasn't, beating people. He slaps his wife once when she's talking back to him in a tent. But we see this theme over and over. And so the themes that I wrote down, in addition to ones we've already covered, is that power can make you go mad, and that he wants more and more and more and more power. But what's the point of power if you're not, again, for him initially, he wants to yield it and leverage it in a positive way. That's not the case in the end. It's him literally hoarding all this wealth, all these statues, and nobody's there to enjoy it with him. And he can't help but be destructive in all his relationships. And the thing that you see, and a point that's made, is that he never completes anything, because everything always falls apart before it reaches its completion. And so even his mansion, what was it, Xanadu?
Xanadu, because it's named after Samuel Taylor Coleridge's.
Yeah, so
it's named after
Xanadu
Kubla
is the
Khan's
name.
palace.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote one of the great English romantic poems, Kubla Khan. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure-dome decree. So Kane becomes America's Kubla Khan, which means that he has a type of Shangri-La, which Xanadu and Shangri-La and Utopia inherently mean no place. There's nothing. You can't have them. You pursue these things, and if it's a physical object, it can't exist on Earth. We live in, it's a fallen world. We're not going to have Eden that you make with a castle. It's not going to happen. So he just, like you said, he's a collector. He collects things.
And he collects collectors, right? So, like, at one point, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's like he calls from Paris, France, or sends a message and says that he's going to acquire the largest diamond in the world. And upon reading the full message, they said, well, it doesn't look like he's collecting diamonds. He's paying and collecting the collectors of diamonds so he can have their collections.
Yeah, which is something that only the brilliant pyramid psychopathic mind really even considers in the moment, or has the ability to do, right? Which is that it's like the English in India. It's like, we don't just want the diamonds or the rubies or the sapphires. We're going to go to the place and own the whole place that makes the things, right? And we're going to own the people that have the things. So his Hearst Castle in California, but he makes it in Florida. Probably Orson Welles probably did that to divert from Hearst attention and to give just a cursory, like, oh no, it's not California, it's not Hearst. Is that you notice that the castle is full of statues, right? And there's one subtle moment in the movie where somebody walks up to a statue and they move it and it shakes. It's like it's hollow. It's even the statue itself, which is not animated, not a person. He's looked on by all of these lifeless things, right? That's Ozymandias. That's another poem. That's Percy Shelley. That's Ozymandias, right? These lifeless things. And even the statue itself looks fake. Right. I mean, I think that he collects Venus de Milos and he collects probably authentic things, but probably a good percentage of them are ripoffs, and he doesn't even care or know.
Right.
Right. And also, one thing about about the power thing and power making you mad is that that's true on one level, and the other level that the movie makes clear is that I'm not sure that Kane doesn't already know that at the beginning. In other words, you notice in the movie, there's not really growth in the movie. He doesn't really grow in any way. He doesn't really learn. He learns things about the sequence of life and what happens to him, but because of events, but he doesn't learn about what life means throughout the movie. He's sort of the beginning. Actually, literally, he's the same at the beginning as he is at the end, because the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning of the movie.
Right.
So it's almost circular. He's wrapped in this thing where he has this long even the declaration of values with
the Declaration of Principles with Leland.
Yeah, Declaration of Principles with Leland is a grift. Even that is a grift.
Right.
We get the feeling that he made this declaration because he learned in school it was something to do, and he intends on violating it. I mean, look, he betrays Leland, he fires him, and his name is Kane. Right? Of course, it's like, of course he's going to do that. What is Jedediah? Is that another name for Solomon? Who is Jedediah?
I'm not sure about the etymology, but I did want to make that point, is that they highlight that Jedediah Leland, again, the best friend of Charles Foster Kane, they met each other through prep school, and I think they went to university together. And Leland comes from a family that his father was believed to be wealthy, and then he kills himself and find out that actually the family owes all this different money, and so they lose all their wealth. But Leland grew up in the sort of echelon that Charles Foster Kane is, brought into, but he is much more of a human. He's much more down to earth. And he really is serious about these principles, and he really is serious about trying to do good things. And I wanted to finish off with how Leland makes a point that Mr. Kane, he never completes anything, just like we see with the castle. But there's the point of the first marriage. Like, he's infatuated with his wife, and he has all the money. He now has a son. He wanted a son. He has a son. He has his wife. Yet he's paying no attention to his wife, and now he wants to be the governor of New York, and he's running for governor, and turns out he's making all these promises, and his son's there, and he's so happy. Well, he's actually having an affair with another woman, and the person that he's running against for the governor position of New York finds out about this, Mr. Is it Getzy? And Mr. Getzy finds out and then sends a letter to his wife while they're listening to him give this great oratory speech and riling all these people up about how he's going to put Mr. Getzy in prison as soon as he's governor, and that, he's going to transform New York and he's going to make it all for the people. And he chooses. So then they go to the place where they're having the affair, and now his wife is confronted with the woman that he's having an affair with. And Mr. Getzy says, you're either going to drop out of this governor race, or I'm going to publish a piece in my paper just showing the entire world that you're a fraud, that you're cheating on your wife. And what does he choose? Instead of his wife allowing him, and it seems like she's very upset, you can tell, but he rejects the family. He breaks up his own family when he has everything going for him, because he doesn't want to be perceived as having made the wrong decision. So I had an adulterous affair with this woman, and guess what? I'm going to choose her over everything else that I have. And so then Leland, finds out, and then Mr. Kane builds this beautiful opera house for his new wife to sing in. Well, turns out she's not a very good singer. And he then is so upset that the critics are actually writing critical reviews of his wife, including his former best friend, that he is basically hiring people to write positive reviews and building opera houses and taking her from New York to Chicago to St. Louis to San Francisco and having her sing in these beautiful opera houses, even though she's not that good. And it's because he doesn't want to be perceived as having chosen the wrong woman, or that his wife isn't as competent as he says she is.
Yeah, he builds castles made of sand. He builds that gigantic opera house. And he even says in that scene, he says, there's only one person that's going to make decisions about Charles Foster Kane, and that's me, right? Which means, oh, your wife that you're in holy matrimony with doesn't count, right? You're making your decisions only for yourself. And it's implied, by the way, in that scene, because we learned right before that we learned that his wife and son died in a car accident. Now, look, even in the movie, it's ambiguous, but Wells knew enough, even in 1941, to show us that when the rich and powerful people have decisions to make and they're going to be compromised, it's literally a compromise situation. He
Right.
gets caught in a tryst, and his political enemy is threatening him. And what's implied is that when the wife and son leave, I think it's 2 years later that they pass away in the car accident, but it's sort of implied that either the political enemy is the one who arranged the car accident, or that Kane himself did it,
Right.
to get rid of them. Because the guy, Jim Geddes thinks that, right? I thought it was funny that he names him Jim Geddes, and it sounds a lot like Getty. And even here's the picture. This book's called House of Getty, and that's Getty. And look at him sitting there at that end of that gold empty table, just like Kane.
Just like Kane.
So I think that, who's to say what happens with the wife and son. But even after he loses the ELECTION, he publishes in his papers, oh, it was stolen, right?
Yeah.
He does the same thing that the political people. I'm not saying offering an opinion on that. I'm saying that's what happens in the film, right? Is that he claims that it was that. And this is also one thing to keep in mind, is that this was also 1941 when the film was released, and that we later had the thing with Dewey beats Truman, right? He's holding up the newspaper, Dewey beats Truman. This goes all the way from Spanish-American War all the way through World War II. And I will say that one of the things one of the meta elements of the movie that's interesting is that when he shows Dolph Hitler and various presidents, and he says Kane talks to these various dictators. Well, Orson Welles himself knew these people. If you've seen the interview, Orson Welles was a classic bon vivant. He was he was a great talk show guest. He would go on Dick Cavett show, and he would go on Johnny Carson. And one of his talks, he says, oh yes, I met Dolph Hitler. Right. His dad was friends with Winston Churchill. He says that he sat next to Hitler at a breakfast when he was a child. Orson Welles knew these people. So then we see Charles Foster Kane knowing these people. And one more element that people probably aren't aware of with this is that when the movie came out, William Randolph Hearst tried to do the exact same thing to Orson Welles that Geddes does to Kane in the movie. Orson Welles heard from one of his people, don't go back to your hotel because you're going to be compromised. And that was true. William Randolph Hearst put a certain age person in his hotel room so that he would go back to the hotel and he would be photographed and he would be compromised, and Welles didn't go. So we have one example of escaping that sort of situation. There's also for anybody interested, there's another movie that sort of deals with William Randolph Hearst, which is, because we're talking about the movie Civil War coming out, has Kirsten Dunst. It's Kirsten Dunst as what was her name? And Mamie, I forget her name, but it was his mistress, Hearst's mistress. It's called The Cat's Meow. Probably the only one who's seen that here, but Hearst had a yacht, and he had famous people, had like Charlie Chaplin, all these people going to it, and he has his mistress on the yacht, and there's a murder on the yacht. And so it kind of mirrors but that mirrors the way that Citizen Kane works. And it's just crazy to me that, the movie is, they considered making the movie about Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes's life is a lot like William Randolph Hearst. He bought RKO Pictures after this. But even that it's clearly about William Randolph Hearst, but it stands for all of these type of people. We see examples of this in the world right now. I think that there's something to be gleaned from watching the movie and understanding the way that the system works by watching this.
Yep. So now let's move through the video or the movie that you guys are now a little bit more aware of. So here's how it begins, and it is copyrighted, so I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
play anything. So we're just going to move through it here. You can kind of see Xanadu, the incredible mansion, castle that he has, which again, never completed, just like everything else in his life was never actually completed. This is the nurse finding him dead that morning.
Can I say something real quick? The first image that you see, the opening image. Well, okay, before the first image, by the way, in terms of filmmaking, there's no opening credits.
No.
We see Citizen Kane in big, like, glowing white on the screen, and we know we're walking. There you go. Very famous. Look at the typography. It's right in your face. This guy's going to be larger than life on a black screen, right? And then we see Orson Welles. It's a Mercury production. And then one of the first images we see the chain link fence, and we see no trespassing, right? Which tells us right away through the subtext, we're about to enter this guy's home in his life, but we're not going to trespass on who he is. We're not going to figure out who this guy is.
Right.
And we see all these empty possessions, like the zoo is empty. We see the castle bigger than life up on the hill. And that's who he is. That is literally Kane. He's just a big glob up on the hill, but we're not going to know who he is.
Right.
Which is what Scorsese mentioned when he was talking about it. I was pretty impressed by that.
And so we see that he drops the snow globe right here, which turns out to be Rosebud. So just spoiler alert. Rosebud, he says Rosebud drops the snow globe, and Rosebud is the name of the sled that he had when he was a child, when he was first taken away by the banker. And so this snow globe is reflective of his home that he had originally. And that's why it's a sort of memorabilia that he never gets rid of. And as he moves in later into his life, it's the last thing that he actually wanted to hold on to, as you can see.
Yeah. You see it continuously, by the way, throughout the film. I just noticed on the rewatch how many times the snow globe appears in the background. And there's Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And also even the image of the hand, like I mentioned earlier, is transparent. We see what looks like stars in his hand. And we see there are a lot of angles in this that are off. They're skewed. He gets all these statues from Europe. He pieces together various
St. George.
castles.
It looks like a model off the one in Prague, the famous one in Prague. So, and they highlight that he has all these animals, right? That only Noah had more animals, that he wanted two of like every species he could purchase. And he had, so it's kind of showing you the building of Xanadu, this incredible mansion that he is living in towards the rest of his life. And it's highlighting during this point how mixed the opinions are of him. So that half the country actually despises this guy, thinks he's the worst. Half the country kind of thought he was a good guy. But yeah, he has one of the largest funeral processions.
Yeah, as if he's Queen Victoria or something, with all these people.
They're the 44 million U.S. news buyers more newsworthy than the names in his own headlines was Kane himself, greatest newspaper tycoon of this or any other generation. So again, highlighting somebody who has control over the narrative, control over media, control over the ways in which we perceive the world, which again, the cinematography, this whole film is about perspective.
Also, one thing about the newspapers is that it's not just the newspapers that he's known for. We see the grocers, we see the various things. He owns various elements in society, and even the newspapers themselves are built, are made of. I think William Randolph Hearst had a huge interest in the timber industry, and that's apparently, I don't know if this is true, but that's one of the reasons that hemp is outlawed, is because of Hearst's influence, because he had such a vested interest in timber and he wanted to print things on paper versus pulp and paper versus hemp, which is cheap and plentiful. And that becomes yellow journalism and, pulp fiction.
Right. I've heard that too. So here's a little reflection on the house he grew up in, Miss Kane's boarding house. This is where he was with his mother and apparently alcoholic, potentially abusive father. And then this is people after his death reflecting on like who he is and what they're going to do with his wealth and all this types of stuff.
He goes, by the way, I just noticed this, that it's a boarding house, and he goes from a boarding house to being a boarder at a boarding school, as if in his own school, in his own house, he wasn't even, as if his own house wasn't even a home. He was a boarder in his own house.
Right. So it highlights how he was involved in the Spanish-American War. There he is next to Teddy Roosevelt. 1919. He was not a supporter of World War One. Again, we see signs "Don't read." Kane. Money signs on the little banners there. Now we're seeing the printing press. Here he is with
Francisco Franco.
Yeah. And this period is highlighting how well connected he was with all the most powerful people in the world, essentially. And one of them, he's with Mean Mr. Mustache Man here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
This is the opera house in Chicago that he builds for his wife, who's a subpar opera singer, the one that he had an affair with. This is him at his house with, again, women and supposed friends, although he really didn't have any friends. What was that?
He looks like Howard Hughes right there.
It kind of lags behind on certain points. There he is being pushed around by one of his workers, and he's totally alone. So this is highlighting by the end of his life, he's already totally alone in this massive mansion, getting pushed around in a wheelchair by one of the workers. And so we already see. So again, you see we're only not even a quarter into the film, and we already see a big thing that says the end, right? So it's like the movie begins with the end of the story.
Yeah, great point. Even the ticker right there, I bet that was a Hearst. I bet Hearst invented that with the ticker. I mean, look, the infinite scroll and the 24-hour news cycle is Hearst. That's Kane in the movie, right? He's showing you that, like, you're not just buying newspapers when the news comes out. This stuff is it's always. He's trying to be a master of time.
Right. And so here, what's happening is these are the journalists that are trying to write an article on like who Charles Foster Kane was. And so what we just saw then by all this little footage for like the last 10 minutes was actually this film that they themselves had kind of put together to describe who exactly this guy is. And it comes to an end and they're like, we still need something. We need a new angle. We need something unique. And the guy points out, well, his last words was Rosebud. And he's like, okay, we got to figure out, what does Rosebud mean? Why did this, the most influential man, the most powerful man in America, why was his last word Rosebud? And that's where this part of the film kind of sets that domino effect off.
So one thing to notice about this scene, which is in the, this is in the screenplay right here that I read today, is that that when we see they're all black, they're all in black, they're all in silhouette. They're faceless. These are faceless people, and this shows that Kane. First of all, it leads us to it conveys the fact that we always see Kane larger than life. Like when throughout the movie, you notice, like in the scene with the compromise, when we see the wife and then we see Getty's over here, when we look at Kane, he approaches the camera and he's larger than the other characters. We're always looking up. We're always looking up at him. Even the famous scene where he does the political speech, his face is huge. And one of the things that Scorsese was talking about in the introduction was that Orson Welles for this movie really pioneered the use of the wide angle lens. And so what he did was something from silent films, which is, and they didn't have it for a long time, and they use it now all the time, which is that when you look at a character on a film, we're looking at them here and the background seems to be blurred. It's like portrait mode. But in this film, we get the full spectrum of the background and we get the characters in the middle, and then we get the characters up front and they're all clear. And that shows us that Kane is both larger than life. He's at the forefront, and that we have a huge perspective of the way the world works, just like Kane does. But when we see the journalists, they're all silhouetted and they're meaningless to him. They're all drones for him. And the guy who provides the conduit for understanding who Kane is, the guy who's assigned with finding out what Rosebud is, we never see his face. We're always looking at the back of his head. This is like totally innovative. You never saw this in movies.
And the way I took it too is that this is a critique of journalism itself, right?
Yes.
So we see the whole premise is that Mr. Kane's will is being externalized through the media, through his newspaper, and then it comes to his death, and now it's upon these journalists to try to figure out who they are, and yet they're faceless. They're not a person. There's not an identity there that you can tag it to. And so I thought it's like a subtle critique of journalists themselves not being, how do I want to frame it? Sort of uniquely human, that they're sort of just an operation for whoever they're working for.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. I think one of the other things with seeing the back of their head with the back of the guy's head there is it's also pointing the audience towards what we're trying to figure out, which is that instead of having two characters talk in profile, talk to each other, where we're viewing like as a kind of audience able to see everything, instead the camera is pointing us to where the journalist has his back to our face, which means that what's his face looking at, trying to figure out what the story is and who this guy is. So we're pointing towards the guy on the right. In other words, like he's conveying, he's showing us that we're following this guy. We are this guy, and he's not going to figure it out. And the movie is ambiguous, but we also get an insight into almost a spiritual understanding of what Kane is in the movie, in that he's everything and nothing, right? The Rosebud thing is like, it's a single word. It's meaningful. It's meaningful to him, but it's nothing. The snow globe represents this thing in his past. It's his innocence. It's his world, but it also shatters. Right. It's like, and it's also a trinket. It's like everything to him, and it's also nothing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just for clarity, it's the guy right here with the glasses. Again, we never see his face, but he is the man who this guy, the sort of, I guess, the head editor, if you will, has commissioned him to find out what Rosebud means and who exactly Mr. Kane is. Yeah. So now this is kind of set into motion.
Look at that. I mean, you just never look at this.
That's about the closest you're going to be able to see that guy's face right there.
This is, I mean, so let me say something about the way the movie was made, and why this is important that it looks like this. And that's the fact that, remember that this is Orson Welles' first movie. He's in his early 20s. But one thing that I think people often leave out is that Stanley Kubrick sort of mimics Orson Welles' film career in terms of a low output in terms of movies that are, but they're impactful, but also creative control. And one thing that's different is they took creative control away from Orson Welles after the film. And that's probably because of Hearst. Hearst crushed him with, I think, The Magnificent Ambersons, which was nominated for Best Director, but they changed the ending to the film. So they took, and that's what they did with Kubrick with Eyes Wide Shut, apparently. But I think that the reason that he got creative control was not just what people say, that he was a Broadway wonderkind, is what they say. He was a radio star. Radio was the medium at the time. It's like the internet now. Everyone was listening to the radio. That's how presidents gave their addresses. Orson Welles revolutionized radio. But how did he do that? Through War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds is what really gave Orson Welles his start. And that was an intelligence psyop. So I think that probably the reason, at least as far as we know and what we've read into it. And I think that what happened here is that because Orson Welles did War of the Worlds, and because of his fame, but more because of what he did with that and what it provided the people who had an interest in it, is because of that, they gave him creative control of Citizen Kane. Because otherwise, there's no reason why you would give a guy this amount of creative control. And when he did the film, this is his first film. He didn't know about camera work. He didn't know about this stuff. It was all theatrical. It was a theatrical production with Mercury Theater. So he got a bunch of his Broadway people to go to be the character actors in the movie, like Joseph Cotton. Joseph Cotton is from he's from 9 minutes from here. His house he lived in Petersburg, Virginia. He's Leland in the film. He's amazing. And I think that Greg Toland, the guy who's the cinematographer, there's a story about that Jeff Bridges told about Greg Toland was Orson Welles was setting up a camera angle, and the guys who were in the union were like, we don't listen to the director about camera angles. We got to go to Greg Toland. Greg Toland heard about it and said, what this guy says on the set goes. He's got control. But Orson Welles learned from Greg Toland, and like, for instance, like when you're looking up at him, logically it doesn't work because you're looking at an angle of a guy up from a table, and you can't have that when you're filming it. So they split the table in half and put the camera under it. So that when we pan out, we see the table, but when we're looking at him, we're looking up from where the table would be. And so at the end of the film, he shares his director card with Greg Toland. It says, director Orson Welles, cinematographer Greg Toland.
Great point. So here, now we see the journalist. He goes into, and again, we're not totally privy to who everybody is. Because it's a non-linear film, you as the viewer, especially for the first time, if you have the first time you're trying to piece all these things together, because a lot of things, it's cutting and going to different places. And you're not exactly sure what's going on. What you do know is this is the second wife, and she is at her supposed place called El Rancho, and she still has Sarah Alexander Kane, even though she, as we'll find out, she leaves him because she's so frustrated. And so he comes in here and he sits down and he tries to ask her a few questions, and she's not interested at all. And this man works for her at the restaurant. You can tell that she's totally blasted, drunk, and she tells him, I want, another double. So of whatever she's drinking, he's like, right away, ma'am. And the journalist, this is what we see the whole time, always the back of his head. He comes and sits down, and she starts screaming, go away. I don't want to talk to you. And she has no interest in talking to him about who Mr. Kane is. And you can't tell, is she upset because he died? Is she a drunk? You're not really sure when you first watch this. You're kind of thinking, well, maybe she's upset that he's dead. But then you've seen all these things. You're like, well, he doesn't seem like a very nice guy. But she won't talk to him. And so this kind of scene ends by him going into this room to phone back to headquarters in New York and let them know, hey, I tried to talk to her. She's not interested at all. What do you want me to do next? And they basically said, okay, we'll go to his library and read his diary.
Yeah. So right there, this scene right here, so this is why the movie's great. I mean, this one frame, we see the guy you were just talking about calling back. He's
still in the shadows.
He's still in shadows. He's in darkness. We see that he's in a phone booth, but we're looking, and it's a 3-walled phone booth, which we know is not a thing that they see in the world. They see a 4-walled, they see an actual phone booth, but we're looking here into both the phone booth and at her and at this guy in the middle in the frame of the window right there, which shows us that we're getting it. It conveys that we're breaking down walls here. We're trying to break down, but we only broken down one wall because we've met with this woman, right? But she's still in the background. We see her barely above the table. She's drinking, and they go, does she want another drink? They're like, yeah, get her another highball. Right?
Yeah. So now the journalist, he's basically told, okay, well, go read the guy's diary. So now he's at Walter Parks Thatcher. Mr. Thatcher is the banker who takes Kane as the 5-year-old from his parents to take him to boarding school. That is Mr. Thatcher. And so now they're in apparently a bank, and Mr. Kane's diary is inside here. And so she's telling him, okay, you have, I think, 3 or 4 hours. Once it's 4 o'clock, you got to go. And by the way, there's no direct quoting from the diary.
Which is crazy because it's like, okay, well, why not just pull the parts you want him to read, first of all? And second of all, we're framed by Yakin and Boaz right there in the mausoleum of the, because when I'm watching it, I'm like, why do they keep this guy's memoir in the mausoleum? Right. But it's almost like a fascist architectural bank or something, like all stone walls and huge. We only see them with the light from above. It's total darkness. And we've got a long table here like Kane would sit at. And then the guard is going to be standing over there at the end of the wall watching this guy read. I mean, Kane is, everything about all these characters are locked down, right?
Right.
And this lady right here, this lady, she looks like she was in From Russia with Love. Like she's, she's like buttoned up. She takes no guff from this
No,
journal.
she
She's like a
doesn't.
journalist. She's like a journalist. Make sure you only quote the lines, right? And this guy's like, okay, don't worry.
Yeah. So then he begins to read the diary, and now again it begins to flash back to previous things in his life. As he's reading it, you sort of have a glimpse through again this unique cinematography at the time. So I first encountered, and then it goes in 1871, and now we see this transition, which I thought was again beautiful transitions in this film for the time period.
Oh,
Until
yeah.
you start seeing snow falling.
Mhm.
Come on, it just started lagging again. And here we see the 5-year-old Charles Foster Kane out here building a beautiful snowman. He has a sled, which again says Rosebud on it. This is potentially his alcoholic father, his mother,
Yeah,
and this is Mr. Thatcher. This is again, he's the journalist is reading the diary, and this is Kane describing the first time he encountered Mr. Thatcher, and he's getting the mother to sign right here, basically that once Kane is of age, he will inherit all this immense wealth, and that they're going to have to educate him and bring him up in a certain way so he'll know what to do with all this money and power.
yeah, this is like the Carnegie Endowment visiting Obama's mom, right? Here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of people chosen for this role in the future, and it's also weird. I'm sure people going down the schizo rabbit hole are like, look, it's Thatcher, right? They're predicting Margaret Thatcher as the overlord of the thing in this thing, and a Thatcher is. We got a thatched roof. The guy's providing a roof over his head, but it's also one who digs ditches, right? So we get a total dichotomy within and this looks like a Dickensian. It's supposed to look like, yes, we have the dad with the unkempt hair or whatever in the background. The mother looks like the buttoned up banker woman or whatever in the previous scene. She's kind of severe and strict looking. We have the weird angle of the porch right here. There's a snowman in the background. The kid's looking up at the Dickensian top hatted fellow who's about to give him his future. It's great expectations in a way, I suppose.
Right. No, I thought that was a great point, though, about the meaning of Thatcher, because all this wealth does both provide him shelter, but also is the digging of his own grave, right? Life actually becomes worse for him. That's the thing. As he grows older, life actually becomes worse for Mr. Kane. And so here he's being introduced to Mr. Thatcher, and he's not really having it, not really interested. And now his mother's telling him, Charlie, you're going to have to go with Mr. Thatcher. You're going to go on a train ride, and we'll catch up with you later. Although she knows that she'll never see him again.
Yeah.
And she makes a point that she'd rather him go on have this new future with Mr. Thatcher than potentially his abusive alcoholic father. And the boy doesn't want to go, and he's not interested. And so this is where he will use the Rosebud sled, this childhood memory of sledding probably down hills with his mother, and he will push Mr. Thatcher over with it. And so now we see the snow covering the Rosebud. Oh, there it is.
Which is a great foreshadowing of what happens in the movie. He constantly tries to subvert Thatcher later in his life. He hates him. We don't know what we don't. It's crazy. The movie is so complex to me because it's hard to know whether the mother is good or bad. I don't know how to. She wants the best for her son. It seems she wants to get him out of Colorado. She wants him to be somebody in the world, but she also is going to takes away her love of her son, right? She's willing to sort of sacrifice her love for her son, but also she's sacrificing her love, so it's hard to come to terms with what she's doing here. Maybe her motivation is simply that, the bank's going to manage the money, or maybe the motivation is that, and she'll get money out of this, or maybe the motivation is to get him away from this, creepy looking dad or something. I don't, it's hard to kind of come to terms with this, but it certainly is reminiscent of Pip being sent to Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. I'm sure Wells was a literary and artistic genius. I mean, literally. And he had a great encyclopedic knowledge, especially of classic literature. So I'm sure that played a part in this.
Right. So now we see that the young boy is off. He is now with again, and this is him he's given a new sled, right? But it shows he kind of dismisses it. He's not interested, and kind of highlighting that he's still yearning. There's Mr. Thatcher again. He's in this massive mansion. The little
Look
boy's
at him.
being given all the Christmas gifts he could ever want. You still kind of see that he's unhappy. He's not fully content. And now we see an older version of Mr.
Yeah.
Thatcher.
So we're looking up at him and he looks monstrous, like looking up at this monolithic guy. And then we see him on the same level right there.
Oops. Let me see if I can. There we go.
Yeah. Look
Yeah.
at him. I mean, that's terrifying.
Right. Towering over the little boy.
Yeah. Juxtaposed against a Christmas tree, especially.
And so look,
Now
and you have all these people, and none of them are his family. None of them
Right.
actually know who he is, but they know who he's going to be because all the wealth that he's getting ready to inherit.
Yeah.
And so again, so lonely. So
Yeah.
lonely. And you think, you almost feel bad for Mr. Kane because he never had the opportunity, as we talked about earlier, to know what love is. He was taken
Yeah.
away from his mother at such a young age, and he was surrounded by all these people that are nice, kind, and friendly with him because they know of what he has, not of who he is. But that's also why he fails to fully develop as an individual and have a sort of core principles within himself. And
This also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and when he does find love, like his first wife, who clearly did love him, and she bore him a son, he destroys it. He voluntarily destroys the whole thing.
It's also bookended by a character at the end of the film. We're looking at Thatcher, who looks a lot like the butler that he has at the end of the one who witnessed him say Rosebud. And what you notice about the end of the film is that he's got this guy who's constantly around him. He's there by his deathbed. And when they ask him about it, he's like, I don't know. You guys have an extra $25 or whatever. Like, this guy he works in the most opulent wealth in the world, but he has nothing because Kane doesn't give him anything. Right. And so everyone around him is interested in what he's going to be and what he has. But like you said, there's no substance to it. It's just, we're going to put you in this thing and you're going to dominate. But because of the lack of any kind of anything metaphysical, any love, we don't see anything. Everything is temporary and surface level. And we saw a church at the beginning of the movie when he's being, at the funeral, but that's about it. Everything else is just pure power.
Yeah.
And one thing that's amazing about this is that I think this mirrors Orson Welles. I don't like to bring in the artist's life and whether it has anything to do with this, but I will say that it is interesting that I think Wells's life mirrors this in a number of ways, and that there's a great clip of Welles talking about how he got creative control over the film, and he said that he was working on Broadway. They offered him to go to Hollywood. He didn't want to go to Hollywood, which made them want him even more. But he said he wasn't interested in money. He was interested in one thing: authority, which is, he chooses his words so well that he wants, it's not power. He wants authority to make the film. And in this, it's not just power. He wants people to listen to, he wants to be authoritative. He wants to be the tastemaker, right? He wants to determine the way people think.
Right. And he thinks that if they accept what he says, then they'll be better. Although, again, we see that that's not the case because he can't see clearly, because he can't see beyond his own intentions.
Yeah.
This letter right here is, now we get a response. This is Mr. Thatcher and Mr. Bernstein. So the Jewish banker that controls his assets, along with Mr. Thatcher, who's sort of his parental guardian. So he's getting ready to come into his inheritance, and he's writing that he wants to purchase a newspaper. And this is saying, "Dear Mr. Thatcher." Mr. Thatcher thinks this is a terrible idea. There's, you're not gonna make great wealth and grow your, your riches through a newspaper industry. So he's like, I can't believe that he's sending all this stuff. And this is the handwritten. And I think at this point, Mr. Kane is in Europe of I forget which cities, in all these different cities.
Yeah.
This one, maybe Italy or Paris again. I forget.
You mentioned Switzerland a lot, which would make sense with
Switzerland
the bank
too. Yeah. And Germany. There's a point where he goes to Germany. And so then we're seeing all these newspaper headlines, and here we see the 25-year-old, which again is Orson Welles.
Yeah.
So he's playing Mr. Kane. He's directing, and as you said, has the full authority over the film. Here's Mr. Bernstein, very, very stereotypical. Here's his good friend, Leland,
Joseph
Jedediah
Cotton.
Leland, and then
Yeah.
here is Mr. Thatcher. And
Yeah.
Mr. Thatcher is again telling him that, look, you don't know what you're doing running this newspaper. And he's telling him, yeah, I don't, but I'm going to do whatever I want. And Mr. Leland, his friend, he's in favor of trying to create a more truthful press and do something that's beneficial for the people. And Mr. Bernstein just does whatever he said and just kind of calculates the money or whatever is related financially to it.
Look at the body language here. Small little wispy man creeping over, and then we have Joseph Cotton, who was in the background there, who by the way, he played Leland. Joseph Cotton is phenomenal in this movie. He is so good. And one of the things here, by the way, is the aging. We see Orson Welles here as a young man. We see Joseph Cotton as a young man who just is so good in this movie. He just looks cool. And we see them age, and it almost looks surreal, like the amount of makeup that they cake on their faces. And we're aware of that. Like but that has a point. We're watching people with masks on, right? And Kane constantly is changed. It's like we have these personae, these various masks that he wears, but in the end, it's like he's masked from himself. We don't look at the guys in the background. The full bodied scene. I mean,
and so here again, so whenever you see these like really close up letters like this right here, this is again the journalist reading the diary. So again, there's so many like cuts. You have to really pay attention as you move through the film to understand what's exactly being said and where is it going. So he's now reading about the diary. Now, remember, it began in 1871 when he met Mr. Thatcher. Now it's showing the date 1929. And we see again Mr. Thatcher over here. And we see Kane, Mr. Kane right here. Now you can tell they're in New York City. And he's talking about which newspaper he's going to buy, which is going to be the New York Daily Enquirer. And you can see this little mustache as he grows older. And I was actually impressed by the believability of the aging of Mr. Kane in 1941. The makeup is actually pretty darn good. Like,
it's
the wrinkles, the face, everything, the hair.
And Wells did his own makeup in the film. I mean, he sits in front of the mirror as if he's backstage at Broadway. That's the thing. Laurence Olivier did that. I mean,
seriously?
Yeah, I think so. And also Natasha in the chat says, I would be insulted if somebody wrote me a handwritten letter and it looked like this. Well, I mean, you should see my handwriting, because this is how I hold my pen, and I write in just crayon like Tupac. I write in crayon like this.
So moving forward here, again, now we see that the gentleman's done reading of the diary, and they ask him, did you find what you're looking for? Do you know who Mr. Kane is now? And he said,
They're
no,
like, hell
not really.
no. Yeah.
But
we know even less. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, look at we know even less, right? Yeah. I'm going to go get a highball and take care of the situation. Look at that.
So now we have the journalist that again is moving through this film, trying to figure out who he is, talking with Mr. Bernstein inside Mr. Bernstein's office, who has this ginormous picture of Mr. Kane, which I thought was kind of strange, like
with a huge head. Look at this.
Yeah.
He looks like the Aleister Crowley portrait of Lamb, the demon, in a bow tie, the gray alien.
And so he's talking a little bit about he's asking like, well, what does rosebud mean? And Mr. Bernstein's like, I'm not really sure what rosebud means. He highlights during this point that it could have been something that was taken away. He asked, well, could it have been like a woman? Was Mr. Kane having an affair, or did he have a girlfriend when he was getting ready to die? And he said, there's a lot of girls when they were young, but not so much when he was older. and he's like, you know, it could have been anything. Mr. Kane, he had everything, but he also lost everything. It could have been something that he lost that he was referring to.
Yeah.
And so he kind of just wanders around his office, then sits in the chair here. And so now we flash back to a younger Mr. Kane, where again you see, whenever you see the mustache, you know this is after the first marriage. So now he's younger again, and now it's showing him purchasing the New York Daily Enquirer. And so here's Mr. Bernstein. They got all their furniture, and Mr. Kane,
Beverly Hillbilly style.
yeah. And so Mr. Kane comes in there with his friend Leland, and the people working up this newspaper. And this newspaper was not a top circulating newspaper in New York, but the difference between them and the Chronicle or the Chronicler, I forget if it's the Chronicle or the Chronicler, one of the two. We'll find out here in a second.
The Chronic.
But they were very serious about like saying factual things in the newspaper. So it wasn't very popular, but all these men in here like really did their due diligence that made sure that anything they printed that could be totally verified. And they were proud about that. But they only work, they said, well, you know, we don't work for 12 hours every day. You know, we come in, we do our stories, we do our research, we write them up, then we print the papers and we go home. And you'll see that Mr. Kane says, I forget what this gentleman's name is. We'll find out. But he's like, is this your office? He's like, yes. Okay, great. I'm going to make it my bedroom now. And he literally moves in all his stuff into his office and has a bed, has a desk. And he's like, what we're going to do is we're going to have news 24/7 because the news never stops. And again, that you can see the old guy is kind of like shook by this. He's like, well, that's not how it works. So here he's totally taken. So this guy originally was the editor and ran the paper, and he's working now for Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane's taken over his office. He has his own bed in there. He has a chair, a desk. Mr. Bernstein's over here hard at work, and they're just looking at the stuff. And this is where Mr. Kane tells the former editor or the head editor at the time, we need more gossip. I'm reading the Chronicle over here, and they're talking about this, and they're talking about this woman. And they're saying this woman is potentially dead, the wife of some prominent man. And he's saying, well, we can't prove that she's dead. She may have just ran away. I'm not going to print something I can't prove. And he's saying, no, that's exactly what we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah. This is a great example, I think, of how people like this is very true. I think that people who have a head for business and these people who rise, even on lower levels, people who are very good at establishing things, are quick to say, this is the way I want it. This is good. I don't care how you did things before. There's no compromises, right? I'm in charge. And this is because also Kane understands probably, just like Wells did, that he could possibly fail. And later he does. There's a huge failure during the Great Depression, but these people are willing to put everything on the line, whether they are personally invested in it or not, but they want to fracture the old system and get this new thing. And also Kane understands that these guys are the fact checkers, right? But who fact check the fact checkers? And in the end, it's all gossip. Everything they do is gossip. So there's no reason why they can't have literal gossip mixed in with the news, because after all, that's what's going to make them thrive. And ironically, this is probably a great point about Kane that I just realized, is that a big thing about Kane is that the irony of it is that he wants to introduce this system where it's more like the common man, like you were mentioning earlier, and where we have gossip on a lower level and the way people actually think. But that's only because he's going to subtly steer the way people think. He's going to introduce this thing. Right. Oh, I'm the common man. I mean, it's like the thing with his support of World War I. His support of World War I is not a based stance. It's that he had no interest in it because
he had no financial interest or gain.
He had no financial, authoritative, or power interest, or he had an interest in the reverse. He had an interest in the Spanish-American War, of all things, right?
Right.
But not World War I. So,
right. So this is him letting the former kind of head of the newspaper let him know that things are going to be working in a different way, and they want to make it much more popular, that this is for the working man, this is for the lowly man, that Mr. Kane's going to give them a voice through his newspaper, and they're going to start adding more gossip and more things that are intriguing to the readers.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, but what he's really saying is, yeah, I'm going to give them a voice, but it's going to be the voice that I give them. It's going to be my voice.
And here's the thing too, you see his disheveled hair. What's kind of made emphatic through these next few scenes is that Mr. Kane is working these people ragged. So while he's sitting in the office with his friend Leland and Mr. Bernstein, and they're making up all the decisions of what's going to be printed, like at one point, I think here in the next few scenes, we see the guy that's actually printing the newspapers. And in one evening, because Mr. Kane can't decide how he wants to word something, or he wants to add something here or take something out, they print the entire newspapers for the next day 4 times.
Yeah.
And you see again, look, his disheveled hair is highlighting that this is late at night. The lights are on. He said, no, you know, we work during the day and then we go home to our families. But now that Mr. Kane's taken over, he's forcing them to be there late at night. He's changing the way they operate, and he's making these people work hours that they would just traditionally never worked.
Yeah, we got to fulfill the orders, huh? Back to work, huh? We got to fulfill the orders, right? He lives in his business,
right? Literally lives in his business. And the former editor is like, this is not the way it should be. He's going home for the night. And so again, they're just kind of talking about again this stuff. Oh, and this is the Declaration of Principles right here.
Yeah.
So this is the principles in which Mr. Kane's going to operate this new newspaper on. So you have Mr. Bernstein, and then you have Leland, and Leland's very supportive. He thinks this is a great idea. You know, having a voice for the working man, making it a more truthful newspaper. The most truthful newspaper in America was the goal. And he writes all this stuff down. And this is where he tells you'll see a worker come in here. Here he is right here. So you see he's covered in black ink. It's late at night. And he's telling him, oh, by the way, you're going to have to reprint the newspapers again, because I want you to add this Declaration of Principles on the front page for tomorrow. Oh, you've already printed them 4 times? Okay, well, you're going to have to do it one more time.
Also, you notice that when Kane puts down the Declaration of Principles, his face is in shadow. I'm laying everything on the line, but I'm totally look at his face.
That's
we
a
can see
great
Leland.
point. I did not pick that up. That's a great point.
Yeah, Leland is earnest right there. Leland looks honest right there, right?
And
the other guy,
he's probably the only fully honest character in the whole movie.
Yeah. And Kane is again wearing a mask of darkness. He's shadowing who he really is, but he's signing this paper.
Right. And Mr. Leland said, oh, well, this is a profound moment. You know, you making a newspaper based on these principles, this is going to be as important as the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution. And he tells the guy right here, who is getting ready to go reprint them again for the 5th time, give me this original copy because I want to keep it. It's going to be important in the future. Again,
life was so good when blue collar workers doing typesetting were wearing like full pinstripe shirts and suspenders.
Right. And so now the Inquirer, the new newspaper that he purchased, is operating the way that Mr. Kane wants. And now they're up to 26,000 in circulation. And they're happy that, you know, it's happening. And then this is, the Chronicle. And so the Chronicle, the big other newspaper in New York, it has a circulation of 495,000, basically 500,000. And here we see Mr. Kane, Mr. Leland, and Mr. Bernstein outside the Chronicle and seeing how big their paper is. And he sees the sort of the board that runs the newspaper.
Yeah.
And Kane gets the wild idea that, you know what? And this is actually another great cinematography. So you're looking at this picture and it begins to zoom in on the photo, zoom in on the photo, right? And you think you're still looking at the same photo, but what you're looking at is that Mr. Kane has now purchased the board of the Chronicle to become the board of the Inquirer, and that he's going to have them work for him. So his newspaper is going to be the biggest one in New York now.
So awesome. And it's a picture within the picture that we're watching, within a window frame picture. Right. So we keep getting levels into this thing where we keep going deeper into the story, and we're going non-linearly through time, but we see that we still don't. We think we understand. I mean, okay. So when I watch this, I understand like I root for Orson Welles, but I also don't know Kane does not appeal to me like as a human. I'm looking at him and I kind of know exactly what he's doing, and he's this shell. He's like a lizard operating in a shell. You know, he's just gonna subvert everything or betray people. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm watching Orson Welles and he's not great as Kane. I'm watching two separate things at the same time and able to hold two different values of people in one movie, which is really, I mean, it's incredible to have something like that in a film.
And let me point out too. So even though like the first, let's say first 20 minutes highlights that Mr. Kane is this very dynamic and divisive character, right? Opinions differ quite strongly on who he is. But from the point where you see he's the 5-year-old to the point where you see he's the 25-year-old, and even right here, you're almost, again, because it was the first time for me watching and I avoided reading about the film. I wanted to just watch the film for the first time.
Yeah.
You're thinking, okay, maybe this guy is going to do something really positive. Maybe because he has the Declaration of Principles. He's kind of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. He's going to do all these positive things for the people. And you're thinking, oh, okay, maybe this is a positive thing. And it's right around this, after these scenes moving forward, where you get the glimpse of the hollowness of who he actually is. And so they just take these photos, and you see him come over here to this big old ice block that says, "Welcome the new Enquirer staff." Again, the board that was over and the staff that was over at the Chronicle. And so then they have this great dinner and this feast, and they're saying all these different things about how bright the future is, how much, and I guess they had almost like I forget, they had more in circulation than the Chronicle had. I think it was like almost 700,000. It was like 600 some thousand they now had in circulation. So they're by far now the biggest newspaper in New York, and they're celebrating this. And then all of a sudden the bands come in. Mr. Bernstein's congratulating Mr. Kane on how great he's doing and how successful the paper is now. He has the chefs, and then he whistles and calls in this marching band who comes through playing music, and then he calls out the call girls, and then they come out, with their little rifles, and they start doing a little ensemble and dancing for the men, which they find incredible. And it's right around here. So then they're singing this song about how great Mr. Kane is and how wonderful he is. And let's see, right around here, he'll start dancing with a woman, and he makes a comment about how he has all these promises, but he has no intention of upholding them. And you see now you see Leland, right? Look how Leland's face has changed. You see Mr.
Leland's
Bernstein, he still kind of has a smirk, but Leland, the friend who's known him, you see his face is changing. And he makes a comment here where you can hear like the thoughts inside of his head. And he says, Charles thinks that he's going to conform these new members on his staff to be more like him. But what I'm afraid is going to happen is he's going to become more like them. And that's exactly what happens. So you see Leland's already seeing that he's no longer standing on the Declaration of Principles. He's no longer standing on the mission that they were going to do together. He's interested in money. He's interested in how many are in circulation. And he's interested in these women and drinking. So he's grabbing some of the girls, and he was kissing some of them. He's having a jolly old time.
Yeah, I like this. I like his dancing scene right here.
I think this is right here where he says, maybe he says it to Mr. Bernstein that I'm afraid he's going to become more like them, not them like him.
Yeah.
And so then Mr. Bernstein, he's coming and finding Leland to let him know that Mr. Kane just wrote us from Paris, France. He's on his way back, and you can see, look, he's traveling. Mr. Kane's traveling through Europe, and these are all the statues. So they're still at the Enquirer, and he's got all these statues, all these things that he's purchasing from Europe and getting sent. See, from C.F. Kane, Florence, Italy, to Charles Foster Kane, New York Enquirer, New York, USA. So he's just going through Europe with all his wealth now, and he's got this successful newspaper. He's buying anything his heart desires and just sending it back. And you see his friend then is having to deal with all the things he's purchasing and maneuver it. He's the one that's actually having to to do the hard lifting, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so they read that Mr. Kane's getting ready to come back, and they have this big. You can see this thing right here. This is highlighting it's some type of celebratory gift for how successful the Enquirer has become. And we see Mr. Kane come in an all white suit. Everybody else is in the traditional black and white.
And he's huge.
Yeah.
He's how much bigger he is than everybody. He's in the foreground and he's huge, but he's the focal point in this. Even look how he matches the archways in the background, right? He's
Mhm.
like he's at the pinnacle. He's at the pinnacle of this thing. He's at the guys in the background laughing, right? Silence on the far right in the background. That's pretty crazy.
So they think they're going to gift him this object and that they're going to celebrate for him coming back from Europe and how well the Enquirer is doing, but he's not interested. And he tells them he hands the lady, "Hey, I need this to be published in tomorrow's newspaper. I want it on the front page." And they're all excited. They think they're going to celebrate, and he's like, "Look, give me that, and I got to go." So he leaves. They're like, "Oh, what's going on?" So then they read the note, and it shows that he just got engaged, that he's marrying Emily. I think it's Emily Norton. I forget what her name is, but the important thing is she's the niece of the U.S. president at the time. And so they say, they make a comment, "Oh my gosh, he's marrying the niece of the president. He's gonna be able to influence the president of the United States." And they make, I think Bernstein makes a comment, they better watch out because he himself may become the president of the United States.
Yeah. Which is his intent. That's absolutely his intention.
And now, and again, another cut scene. Now we're back to the journalist interviewing Mr. Bernstein after the death of Mr. Kane. And now they're talking again more about, he's talking about the first wife and saying, I think this is where he makes a comment about how he wasn't able to love somebody.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here we go. This is my favorite scene.
Okay, so next one. So now the journalist cuts from Mr. Bernstein and goes and sees Leland.
Yeah.
Leland is in the hospital, although he has no specific disease. And Mr. Bernstein makes a point that old age is one of the few diseases that a man doesn't wish to be cured from. And so he's in this hospital, or this home, if you will, being taken care of by the nurses. Has no specific illness, but he's just old. And so the journalist comes to kind of talk to him about Mr. Kane.
This is a great scene. This is Joseph Cotten at his best. Look at that dissolve right there. Dissolves into the background. And this is where Kane or where Leland really talks about Kane and how he mentions something here about how Kane was full of opinions about everything. He had opinions on everything, but he had no principles. He had no beliefs. It was anything under the sun he offered an opinion on, but he's just a shell. And he clearly has a great handle on who Kane was, which is to say that Kane is really no one, right? He's just a guy that he worked for. And Joseph Cotten is fantastic in this. He's great as an old man, by the way. His acting as an old man, because Joseph Cotten was also young, is great because he continuously keeps interjecting this thing about, like, I'll give you an interview if you happen to know where I can find a cigar. Make sure when you leave, you go and get me a cigar and then you bring it back, please, sir.
Right. And so this is what my point when I was talking about the distance, and when you're going to see this as we move towards the end of the film. Notice Mr. Kane's going to come into frame here, and he's going to sit right next to his new wife, and he's going to adore her with compliments and how beautiful she is and how happy he is, and he's going to be right next to her, and just notice again the growth and distance between him and his supposed lover. So right here, he's showering her in compliments, how much he loves her. And she's like, "Oh, but Charlie, you were at the, he's like, he tells her to get ready for tonight. And she goes, "Oh, but it's so late." And he says, "Oh, but our night, it's just starting. It's just the beginning." And she's making comments about how late he's staying at the newspaper. And she's like, "Well, what do you do so late at night?" And then now the next scene, she's sitting on the side of the table. Now the next scene, she's sitting across him on the table. And you see his demeanor change. He's more focused on work. She's saying, Charlie, you're never home. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's beginning a little bit more angry by the fact that she wants to spend time with him. And he really doesn't have a good excuse other than that the paper needs him to be there. And so you see him changing, and you're going to see her demeanor become a little bit more sour. And you see that the distancing emotionally to the point where now, and so this is all Leland reflecting on the relationship he had with his first wife, Emily, who, for all intents and purposes, actually loved, Charles Foster Kane.
Yeah.
She was a good woman. She comes from a noble family in the U.S., a high status family, and she just wants to have a traditional marriage with children. And so here we see, then he starts talking about the affair, what will become the second wife, Sarah Anderson, I believe. And she is she claims to be an opera singer. So what happens, and he starts talking about the toothache, the incidence of the toothache. And so this is Sarah coming out of a drugstore, and she has this massive toothache, and she's trying to put all this medication inside of her to numb the toothache. And she's laughing hysterically because when she walks out, she sees Mr. Kane covered in mud. A horse and buggy just like went by and splashed a mud puddle all over his beautiful suit. He's dressed to the nine. And she tells him, hey, he starts asking, like, why are you laughing at me? And they start talking, and she eventually says, look, I can get you some hot water if you want to get cleaned up. And he kind of reflects on it. And then he's like, yeah, I'll take you up on that. And this is when he enters her house.
So he's clearly, he's slumming it here. He's on the streets. He's alone. She's coming out of a pharmacy. She's clearly on laudanum, right? She's had her toothache. She actually ODs on what is some sort of sedative, but probably like laudanum later on. Also, when I was watching this, I couldn't help but think that Wells knew, writing the script, that the toothache in the toothache in Much Ado About Nothing and in the Renaissance is a subtle symbol of love. It's called oh, I've got the toothache. They call it the ACHE, the H. When you have the toothache or the H, it means that someone somewhere, it's like a superstition that you're in love. And so she comes out, she's got this toothache, and this is where they fall in love. And he's also, like, it looks like he's on the Bowery. This is not his life. He's covered in mud, like you said, right by the ditch, right? We talked about the ditch earlier. Just going back a second, the one, I think probably the most revelatory scene in this about Kane occurs on page 76 of the script. And I just want to read briefly what Leland says about Kane.
Yeah, go ahead.
He says, you want to know what I think of Charlie Kane? Well, I suppose he had some private sort of greatness, but he kept it to himself, grinning. He never gave himself away. He never gave anything away. He just left you a tip. That's amazing.
Right.
He had a generous mind. I don't suppose anybody ever had so many opinions. That was because he had the power to express them, and Charlie lived on power and the excitement of using it. But he didn't believe in anything except Charlie Kane. He never had a conviction in his life. I guess he died without one. That must have been pretty unpleasant. Of course, a lot of us check out with no special conviction about death, but we do know what we're leaving. We believe in something. And then he says, you're absolutely sure you haven't got a cigar? And then he says, could you remember something about Kane? And he says, I can remember everything. That's my curse, young man. It's been the greatest curse that's ever been inflicted on the human race, memory. I was his oldest friend. As far as I was concerned, he behaved like a swine. Maybe I wasn't his friend. If I wasn't, he never had one. Maybe I was what nowadays you call a stooge. Fantastic.
And so Mr. Kane, just as BLA highlighted, this is all being a sort of a story that's being revealed to the journalist through Leland. So Mr. Kane then goes into the house. He is being cleaned up by Sarah inside of her room. And then he starts, kind of making some jokes, trying to make her giggle, and then he shuts the door. And she comes and opens the door, and she says, "Oh, I think the housemaid. I always keep the door open when a suitor comes." And so now we see that she thinks he is a suitor for her, and he is not revealing to her that he is married because she doesn't know anything about him. So as they sit here, and she's giggling and they're having a good time, she highlights that she's never heard of Charles Foster Kane. She didn't know who he is, and he's kind of surprised by this. Oh, you don't know who I am? Well, I'm in the newspaper business. And she's like, oh, okay. And so they start talking, and you see the kind of flirtatious nature of this conversation, and he's getting her to smile and laugh and giggle, and then he says, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And I forget what exactly is a I forget what exactly she said she did. Kind of
Like a
an odd job.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, what did you want to do?" She's like, "Well, I always wanted to be a singer, but my mom did, basically my mom didn't think it was the right move for me." And he's like, "Well, I want to hear you sing. Do you have a piano?" She's like, "Yeah, I have a piano in the other room." So he tells her to go to the other room. Her toothache isn't hurting as much anymore. It's numb, and he wants to hear her sing. And so now she starts singing on the piano.
She's like, bong, bong. She's hammering on the piano.
And so now we see we move
Very
from
famous.
Yeah,
very
we
famous
move
scene.
from him inside the home with this other woman who helped him clean up after being covered in mud to then Leland's out here campaigning for him. Leland, Kane for governor, Kane for governor. So his best friend's out here actually campaigning for him to be governor. And then it flashes forward to this speech, this monumental speech that he's giving and telling the people of New York what he's going to do as soon as he's becomes governor. And we see it, out in the audience, his actual wife, Emily, with their now son, who looks just like he did when he was 5 years old. I assumed it may have been the same actor.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah.
So you see the spitting image of Charles Kane and his young boy, and his son's admiring him, and he's so enthusiastic about his dad. And you see Emily kind of has a straight face, and we'll find out why. She knows something that other people don't. And so we see Leland is a little bit, yeah, he's a little bit kind of frustrated because during the speech, Mr. Kane literally says that as soon as he becomes governor, the first thing he's going to do is put his political opponent in prison.
That's right. Lock her up.
Yeah. And so he's gonna put Mr. Geddes in prison, and he's gonna rot for his crimes in jail. And he's having this incredible speech. I wish I could stop right when we see Jim. There it is. There it is. This is Mr. Geddes. So while he's literally telling this auditorium full of people that he's going to put this guy in jail as soon as he's governor, and apparently, according to the speech, it's like a sure thing that Charles Kane is going to be elected. Like because of his newspaper, he's got the full support of the people. And so he's hearing all this stuff. And then we see Mr. Kane kind of leaving. Everybody's congratulating him. He's holding his son. His son's so excited about his dad and tells him, "Oh, you did so good." And then his wife sends the son off in a car without him, Mr. Kane, or the wife, Emily. And he's a little confused by this. Why did you send, our son off? And she goes to get in the car herself. And so he walks over to try to, again, get more answers. Like, what's going on? And she says, "I'm going to like 185 and the address of that where Sarah lives." And you see his face again. I think this is where she says it. His face kind of drops, and she says, "You can either come with me or you can stay here." And he's like, "I'm going to go with you."
Yeah.
And so she then goes to 185, whatever the address is. And you can already tell the wife doesn't know what she's going to expect. But this letter, what you find out is that Mr. Geddes had Sarah write a letter basically telling Emily that something bad is going to happen to you and your child and Mr. Kane if he doesn't drop out of the governor race.
Yeah.
And when the door opens, of course, the housemaid knows Mr. Kane by name. So now the wife knows, "Oh, you've been here before." And then she walks up the stairs and Sarah goes, "Oh, Mr. Kane." And she starts running after him because she doesn't know he's married. And now the wife knows that, oh, he's having an affair with this woman. And here's Mr.
Yeah.
Geddes in the doorway who put Sarah up to send this letter to Emily so that now everybody knows what's going on. And
Caught him lacking. Caught him lacking big time, and caught the maid lacking too. She's like, "Oh, hey, Mr. Charlie Foster Kane, Social Security number, who's been here 35 times."
Yeah.
Right? I mean, totally caught him lacking. I think back in that scene with the with Geddes looking down, there's only a few times in the movie where we see a perspective looking down on Kane. The rest of the time, we're either even with him, we think we're on par with him, or we're looking up at him as if he's this, monolithic figure. We're seeing him in shadow right here. But with Geddes, I think the important thing is that we saw looking down on Kane, not even in the same way we saw it sort of in profile, but we see that he's young and then we're looking down on him because of time. But in that scene, in the last scene where he's doing the political speech, we see that there are people who are above Kane, right? It's not just him. It's not just him at the top. He's not at the peak of the pyramid yet. He's going to experience a fall because the way that Geddes is looking down on him in that auditorium, it's like otherworldly. He's like looking down on a different world. Kane is minuscule, and that there's somebody above him who's going to control his fate. He's been caught lacking, and he's going to be compromised here. The guy literally threatens his life, her life.
Right.
Right. We also, in that one scene where we see Kane, and then we see the gigantic picture of Kane's face that says Kane on it. One thing that the way they achieved that was this is Broadway. They have people on the stage, and then we see this massive audience all in darkness, and it looks like they're moving. And they did that by having a still picture of people and then pinpricking it and having lights moving in the background. So it looks like the people are moving. There's not really any people there. And I think that's revelatory because we now know that a lot of these big figures, especially entertainment figures who do specials like on Netflix, have no audience. There's canned laughter. It's all piped in. There's like 7 people. I mean, who was it? Seth Meyers' comedy special Sam Hyde brought out. It's like he's talking and it looks like there's a huge audience, but it's stock footage, right?
Wow.
It's like there's no one actually there. It's all just a production.
That's
and here's the moment where he comes to a head. And it deserves to be mentioned that his first wife is not a nobody. She's the niece of the president. So she is in the world of information. Not that she's an intelligence or anything. I'm saying she's in that.
But she comes from the elites.
She does. She comes from the elites, and she knows what this means.
Right.
Kane is also in this world, and so is Geddes. But these people are constantly feeding on one another, right?
Right. And so, and just look at who's consoling who, right? So they come into this room, and Sarah is now kind of figuring out that he's married, yet she's still so enamored by Mr. Kane. She's over there grabbing him, telling him, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We'll figure it out. He made me do it. He made me do it. He threatened me." And what he says is, your little boy looks really high up to you. You think you want this in the newspaper? And so he literally says that Mr. Geddes to Mr. Kane, "Hey, I'm going to publish the fact that you cheated on your wife and that you've been having an affair unless you drop out of the race." And this is when Mr. Kane's given the ultimatum: either keep your family intact, a woman who actually loves you, the wife of your son, the mother of your son. And this is where he makes the statement right here that right here, he walks forward, right out of the shadow into the light, using that motif again. Oh, come on. So he walks out of the shadow into the light, and this is where he says, he makes the comment that, "Do you want your son to see this in the family newspaper and look down on his father?" And he says, "Nobody's going to make a decision about Charles Foster Kane except Charles Foster Kane," and basically tells him that, yeah, go ahead and print it. And so the wife leaves.
One thing I think it's important here also is that this is an example of where the blackmail is not done by agents. It's done by, these people are all in a room together, right? They're in the Bowery or whatever. Kane is already there, but Geddes also goes there himself. This is his last warning. This is it. He didn't send an agent. Leland's not there. Geddes didn't send anybody. He went there personally. So he means business. And Kane tries to call his bluff, I suppose, but he probably knows he's not bluffing. He just doesn't. So what, right? He's like, I don't have any feelings anyway. It's just like, go for it. And then we know after this, they don't show it right here, but we know that the result of this, even if it's not immediate, is that the wife and son are gone. They're dead. They die. We know that from the beginning of the film, that the wife and son are not going to make it. They die in a car accident. And so again, what we can assume is that somehow this is a result of this. It's not spoken. But also notice that when the rest of the movie goes on, they are totally out of the picture.
Right.
So if they're not in Kane's immediate interest, then they don't exist to him.
Yep. So Kane makes his decision that he's going to allow the blackmail to be made public and that he's going to choose Sarah over his family.
Yeah.
And he starts yelling at Mr. Geddes, and Mr. Geddes comes out and sees Emily and tells her that he'll get a car for her to go home. So again, respect for, but a little bit more gentlemanly behavior, right? This isn't about just doing away, because he's surprised that Mr. Kane doesn't give in. And he tells him that when the wife leaves, he's like, wow, you're more foolish than I thought you were. I figured that you would just drop out of the race and, we can keep all this under wraps. And he decides to break up his family. And so this is kind of the last time you see Emily. And so here's the newspaper. Now we know that the love affair has been made public. The highly moral Mr. Kane and his tame songbird. So highlighting that he has an affair with a singer.
Which is supposed to be a stand-in for a prostitute. They're trying to say she's a prostitute, right? By extension. She's a nightclub singer.
Right. So now Mr. Kane's coming out of the office, and everything's falling apart, right? So he's not going to be governor. Here comes Leland. He's drunk, and this is a scene where he's going to tell Charles the truth about what's going on and how he basically ruined everything that they thought they were going to build together. And eventually, Charles decides that he's going to get drunk too. I've pretty much summed up the dialogue here. It's basically just Leland letting him know that you basically failed on your mission and you've screwed everything up and you're not who you said you were. And so he asked to be sent to Chicago. He doesn't want to work with Kane in New York anymore. He doesn't want to work he'll still work for the newspaper, but he wants to be in charge of doing it over in Chicago. He doesn't want to be a part of basically what he's got going on in New York anymore. At first, Kane doesn't want to let him go, and then he says, all right, fine, go to Chicago. What was that headline? Kane marries singer, so now he marries
singer.
Yeah,
singer, right?
Because she's not very good. So he's now decided that he's going to go ahead and marry the woman that he had an affair with, and he's forcing her through his power and influence and his money to be the lead opera singer in all these opera houses, despite nobody thinking she's any good at all.
Yeah. This is also a fake opera that she's singing. They could have used a real opera. I thought for a minute that it's obviously set in a seraglio, which it looks like this is like a scene from Amadeus. They probably got it from this. Even though it's a real opera that they use in the film. But Mozart had an opera that's was it Don Juan? Oh, somebody might know, but that was the big scandal with Mozart at the time, was that you're going to set it in a house of a seraglio with his concubines. We can't have that on the stage. And we see a Turkish scene where she looks like a concubine.
Yeah.
And so it's we have a stage play. I mean, this is the Mousetrap in Hamlet. We have a play within a play. And here there are so many layers of meaning going into who we're supposed to find out Kane is. That's by the way, mirrored literally at the end of the film. There's a very famous scene where we're going to see Kane walk in profile across what looks like almost a stage, and there's infinite reflective mirrors in the background.
Yep.
So we get all these variations of who Kane is that we still don't know. And here again, he's dressed to the nines. He looks like JP Morgan or something, and he's towering over all these other people. Anyways, top hat helps,
Right.
but the governorship is over, but he's gonna continue, and he's gonna dominate this woman's life and use that for his attempt at gaining love, even though he doesn't seem to have any love to give.
And so what's happening in this scene is that Mr. Kane builds one of the most massive opera houses, arguably in the world, and he builds it in Chicago. And so she just had this opera night in Chicago. Of course, that's where Leland went, right? So he goes to the office of the Inquirer, his newspaper, and he's asking, well, how come the review isn't done? And they let him know, well, we're waiting on Leland. He has to finish his review. And they say, well, where is he at? He's still in his office. And so they look over, and it's this office right here. So Mr. Kane then walks in, opens the door, and we see that Mr. Bernstein quickly follows, and that Leland's drunk, and he's passed out on top of his typewriter. And he was giving a review of the opera, and it was a pretty honest review, basically saying that she's not very good, and most people didn't want to listen to it.
Yeah. Was this when he was watching the opera and he was cutting the program into shreds, and he was looking at it like fanning himself?
I think that is going to be another opera. So
Right.
I think they write this. I'm not sure, because I think that scene comes after this scene.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
he gets fired after this. So right after,
Mm.
so what happens here is Mr. Kane asks Mr. Bernstein to read what exactly is on the typewriter. And as he's reading it, Mr. Kane's becoming aware that Leland was giving an honest review, and he's not giving a false review as he wanted to sort of glamorize and lift up Sarah. So Bernstein reads it to him, and then Mr. Kane is a little frustrated, and then he rips the paper out, and he decides, you know what? I'm going to finish his review. And so he's going to write a bad review of his wife as Leland, and then he fires Leland. So his best friend, his longest friend in the entire movie. So Leland wakes up, realizes his paper's gone, sees Mr. Bernstein, and Mr. Bernstein tells Leland that actually Mr. Kane's getting ready to finish your little article.
Yeah, he finishes the tweet himself. Bad opera, worst thing I've ever seen. Total trash.
Yeah, and that's basically what he does here. So Kane finishes the review and tells him that he's fired and gives him $25,000, sends him $25,000. And this is Leland basically saying that was about the last time I talked to him.
Yeah, $25,000 with inflation. He sends them $250 million, right? Basically.
Yeah, $25,000 at that point was a lot of money.
Holy, it's a lot of money right now. Hey, by the way, like and share, you guys. We're simulcasting here, which thanks to DPH, I learned how to do because I'm a total slow boy with this. So I got to thank him for that. I really appreciate it. And please make sure that you support both of us. You can like and share the streams. You can add your comments later. You can email me, madmaximalism2x's@gmail.com. Hit us up with super chats, Dono, Streamlabs for DPH right here. All my links are in the video description. Please tell us what you think, and we really appreciate everybody being here.
Yeah, guys, we'd really appreciate the support. If you've enjoyed this review, I will read all the super chats. We're almost finished through the entire movie here. So once we get finished with the full review, we'll address any super chats. So feel free. You can send them over here on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube, or gifts and memberships, and reach BLA. His links are in his video description, and we'll read all the super chats addressed to us once we're done. Okay, so now he's kind of done with his story, and he's given his full view of who Mr. Kane is. And so we see El Rancho back at Susan Alexander Kane, that's restaurant, right? That's where she met the journalist, but she didn't want to talk. And now she's actually talking to the journalist about who he is. So it must have been days later. And now she's kind of opening up that, he was not very loving. So here she's trying to get opera lessons. Mr. Kane has hired this, I assume he's from Europe. He has an accent. So he's an incredible opera coach or singer of some sort, and he's being hired to instruct her, and he's getting frustrated because she's just not good. Like he can't get her to sing the opera the way that it's supposed to be sung. And then Mr. Kane comes in, and he is he tells him, basically, he says that she's no good. And he said, I didn't hire you to give her critique. I hired you to teach her how to sing.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right. So we go back to another performance that she's getting ready to have. And here
Here
is
we go.
Leland at that performance, ripping up the entire little pamphlet
Program, yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
program. So he's bored to tears. You see people falling asleep. People's faces are cringing while she's singing. She can't hit any of the notes. You see the singer or the tutor, the teacher down here. He's like so frustrated. It's not going the way it's supposed to go. Leland's more amused with the pamphlet, and Mr. Kane begins to, so that it's over and everybody starts applauding, but nobody's asking for an encore. Nobody's going up
Yeah.
and like really showering her in praise. And he,
Brava, bellissima. There's nothing, and he doesn't clap, by the way, when it's
yeah,
over.
he doesn't clap when the other people clap, but while they start to stop clapping, you see his face. He's pissed. He's mad. He realizes that this, you can't fake the lack of talent. And so he just starts clapping loudly and loudly and loudly. And he stands up, and he's the only person in the theater clapping and sort of giving her an encore praise.
Yeah.
So
Jed Leland, I'll just say Jed Leland's stage views is we go into a long storyline here, which doesn't, it's funny because it seems like it gets away from what we were going through. And in the rest of the film, we're going through Kane's various like story arcs. It is almost like it seems like a side quest, but he becomes the thing is that kind of like Scorsese's Aviator, about Howard Hughes. It's like these guys become obsessed with their thing. And this mirrors Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes, by the way, went to Vegas one time, and he saw that Kirk Kerkorian owned the most famous, and most profitable hotel in Vegas. So Howard Hughes stayed there for 10 years. He just lived on the top floor of the hotel. He bought the whole hotel, and he ended up buying all the casinos in Vegas. So he just became obsessed with this thing. He did the same thing with airplanes. He did the same thing with cinema. They just become obsessed with this stuff. And this is what Kane is obsessed with. And the reason that this is compulsive, one of Orson Welles' other films was Compulsion. The reason this is compulsive is because a regular human being knows that she's no good. This is not her talent, right? But she's like his little songbird in a gilded cage, and he's going to control her. It goes from fostering Charles Foster Kane, the thing that she loves, and he's doing good, he's trying to help her, to becoming compulsive where she doesn't want to do it anymore. Even though she started off loving it, she's no good, and she just gets negative attention. And then it becomes like she's a magnet for all of the negative attention and hate, so that it deflects from Kane himself, right? Which is probably a subconscious reason he's doing all this stuff. It's like he doesn't have to be the object anymore. It's all on her, until she eventually tries to unalive herself as a result of it.
Right.
And that's sort of his breaking point with it.
So now she's reading the review of Leland, which was really written by Kane, and she's all distraught. She can't believe that Jed Leland would write such a terrible review of her opera, and she's humiliated. She doesn't want to sing anymore, and she has no idea that it was her husband that actually finished it and wrote it. And this is a letter that came in from Leland. And what it is, it's an envelope of the Declaration of Principles that he wanted to keep. And so he sent it back to Mr. Kane, of which he opens it up and sees what they are. And he just rips it apart. You can see the principles right there. And he rips it apart. He's annoyed that Leland would even send that to him. And she's like, oh, so you fired Leland. Why did you send him $25,000 after writing such a terrible review? And he basically gets frustrated with her, saying that she's not going to sing again, and tells her, you are going to sing, right? So his shadow, look at this, his shadow casts over her. You can only see a little bit of glimmer in her eyes.
Yeah.
That's it. And so you can tell she's terrified of him, and she's going to go ahead and sing. And this is where she kind of goes from New York to Chicago to St. Louis, all these different places. And nobody really likes her stuff, even though she's getting all these positive reviews from the Enquirer because he owns the paper. And then she tries to kill herself. She
Yeah.
overdoses with something here. We're not exactly sure.
It's got to be laudanum with that spoon right there, mixing into that glass.
Could be. Very well could be.
Not that I'm the laudanum expert here, folks,
Yeah.
but no, she's drinking that lean. Yeah.
So he finds out that she's breathing, but she's unconscious, and calls for the doctor. The doctor comes, fixes her all up, tells Kane that she'll be fine in a couple days or so. And Kane doesn't leave her side. So you're thinking, man, maybe he really loves her, but it's really not love. He doesn't want to be made a fool by her not continuing to sing.
And look at her face right there, man. Like, I think she's, I mean, that's fantastic. Like, look at her. She looks like Judy Garland, in her latter years later, redundant, but in her latter years, completely ravaged by, drugs and alcohol. She's in pain right there. The only thing, I mean, this was a lot to me. I thought this scene was it's funny how the movie, for being a great movie, is devoid of any kind of substantive feelings throughout the thing. I think that's obviously the point. We've talked about that. But here we get a rare example of somebody who was in love with Kane. When the wife showed up in the compromise scene, she didn't even know who the wife was. She didn't know who Kane was. She's just a person, right? And she's in this gilded cage, and she's willing to destroy herself in the thing that she loved because of what he's put her through. I think it's a complex scene. I mean, but look at her right there, man.
Yeah. Everybody's bringing up laudanum. Somebody asked, I think it was moldy apple.
What's laudanum?
Or when laudanum was invented. The historical record on laudanum is Paracelsus. So that'd be 16th century, 1500s. He was a magician, alchemist, mystic, and he kind of developed the alcohol tincture with opium in it for pain relief. So to perform surgery and stuff like that.
Yeah. Guess what? There's a connection with what the movie's about. There's a reflective connection here, which is that Kubla Khan, the poem, was written with an introduction by Coleridge talking about how he took a tincture of laudanum, wrote the poem, and then was interrupted by what he says, a person from Porlock, a business call, somebody calling on his house, and he came out of his opium haze and couldn't remember the rest of the poem. But Kubla Khan, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, right? Caverns made of ice. We saw the ice sculptures earlier. This guy lives like Kubla Khan, and here's the opiated laudanum tincture in the film.
Right. Okay, so let's wrap up the movie here. We're pretty much towards the end. So, we see now they're in Xanadu, the massive castle that he's built, and we see that Sarah is unhappy. She spends all her days doing puzzles, of which he finds childish, but she has nobody to talk to. She has nobody to hang out with. He's constantly working and doing his own stuff. She's by herself, and she tells him, and you can see how disoriented she is. So she says, Charlie, what time is it? And he says it's 11:30. She goes, what's New York time? It's 11:30. Day or night? It's nighttime. So she's just locked away in this castle, and she starts lamenting the fact that there's nothing to do. She's bored. She wishes there was something to do. And again, she's sitting here doing a puzzle. Look how far away. Remember the distance thing that I highlighted. Now he's having a conversation with her on the other side of this massive room inside of his castle. And he's sitting in what looks to be like a golden throne. And she's saying that she wants to go to New York. She wants to see friends. She wants to go out to a nightclub. She wants to hear music. And he goes, we're going to go have a picnic. But Charlie, we're going to go have a picnic. Charlie,
He's in a cathedral of himself right here.
Yeah.
with himself as God, and it's interesting that all she has to do is puzzles, right? Which seems like she's got everything. Somebody just brought up her bracelets are reminiscent of shackles. It's like she's wearing, she's shackled into this place with these portraits in the background and these archways in front of this fire. But she's putting together a puzzle because first of all, her mind has just been shattered.
Yeah.
She was absolutely broken in the last scene. She's trying to put the puzzle back together of her own mind and her life. And they even bring that up in the screenplay in the lines in the movie. There's one, that Kane's life is a puzzle with one missing puzzle piece, right? There's something missing, and that's the thing that brings it all together. And her puzzle picture that she just that she just put together in that last scene was reminiscent of Colorado and the idyllic, youthful scene that Kane grew up in. She wants to go back to the same place, a kind of Edenic place, and she can only do that through putting a puzzle together.
Right.
It's just shrouded in darkness, lamentation statues in the background, big, huge marble arches, Hearst Castle, and she's broken, and he's just sitting in darkness.
And she is going to put the puzzle together because she's getting ready to leave him.
Yes.
So she wants to go have a social life. She wants to see people again. She wants to be part of the city. She wants to have some type of excitement and entertainment, and he won't let her. He says, no, we're going to go on a picnic. And so the next scene, they're on their way to a picnic. They're in these cars, and really the picnic is just for him because he doesn't have any friends, just to show off for more people. So we see there's like these elaborate tents. They're out on the beach next to the ocean, and there's all these different couples there, but he's not even participating. He has her in the tent with him, and she's again telling him that you don't love me, you don't care, I feel, and I highlighted Melly's comment. Where did that go? Look at her bracelets, that she is a slave. And this is because he can't love somebody. And as you talked about, the authority, the power, he wants to have full authority and power over her. And that's what he does. And he thinks this is like him showing love for her or something by literally making her a sort of slave. And this is where she's finally just kind of done with it and gives him some lip, talks back, and then he slaps her. And she looks up to him and tells him right there with that face, she says, don't tell me you're sorry. And he says, I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
And
Melly says, diabetes. Right.
So now we're back at his castle, and he finds out, he's being told that Sarah has a driver that's getting ready to come pick her up, and she's packing all her bags. So he goes back to her room. She has her own little room, and
she's got a doll of her own face right there.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yep.
Another porcelain doll. Oh, the snow globe, by the way, is in the background of the scene, as we're going to see.
Yeah, it's the one thing in this room that he doesn't destroy.
Mm-hmm.
So she tells him that she's going to leave, and he's like, oh no, don't do this. Don't do this. I promise I'll change. I promise I'll stop, forcing what I want on you and allow you to dictate what we're going to do. And then he says, his last comment is like, you can't do this to me. And she goes, I can't do this to you. It's all about you.
Yeah.
It's all about you. What about what you do to me? And he has no response. And she goes, well, I'm going to do this. And she leaves. And she leaves him. And this is essentially her putting the puzzle pieces back together. It's her reclaiming her identity. It's her reclaiming a sense of accurate perception of what's going on in the world and what a relationship's supposed to be like. And so she leaves him, and he is distraught over this, and he starts destroying everything in the room except the snow globe. So he
breaks his home. Yeah.
And then he sees the snow globe right there, and he walks out. And this was the butler, because we'll find out that the journalist right now is talking to this butler, and he's asking him about the times that he heard him say Rosebud. And he says when he stood in this doorway with that snow globe, the only words that Mr. Kane said was Rosebud. And then he puts the snow globe in his pocket, and he walks out. And you see, and now the journalist is talking to the butler, and he's like,
look at that guy's face. Look at his expression. This guy's great.
And so this is the end of the movie. You see again all the stuff Mr. Kane's collected in this massive Xanadu castle, but it means nothing. Nobody's there. Nobody cares about him. He has nobody to share it with. He's cut in everybody out of his life. And so this was the scene that you're talking about that's reflective of Indiana Jones.
Yes.
That you see all these crates, all these statues from all around the world. He's got the largest collection in the world, and he's dead. It's gone.
That also, it's weird how it also looks like a miniature of a city right there. Looks like skyscrapers, like we're looking at New York or something, but it's all just kind of junk. You know, there's just, they have to go through the inventory and there's so much stuff, it just ends up being junk. There's just too much stuff. It's all just material stuff. They end up just burning everything, right? Burning all the wood, which, by the way, Leland was moving. You brought that up earlier. Leland was moving. Leland became the mover, right? Hauling the stuff away. He's also hauling wood, like as if he's holding onto Rosebud in a way. And, you know, Kane, there's Rosebud burning. We have immolation. Kane broke his home himself, destroys this room full of all this like childhood whimsical
broke his family
and then in his wife's room.
Sarah clearly loved him, and he broke that relationship. He broke her, really. And that's where, again, it's so prophetic halfway through the movie when Leland says he can't complete anything. Everything in Mr. Kane's life is left uncompleted. And the same thing is true with all these relationships. And here is like the big reveal at the end of what Rosebud actually means. It's the sled. It's the sled that he left back at home when he was taken away from his mother in Colorado. And now it's being thrown in the furnace because the people that are looking after all this stuff that he acquired, they view, oh, well, this is just junk. And so the journalist never finds out what Rosebud means. And that is the end of the movie right there.
The whole thing is black smoke, right? It all just turns into black smoke with no trespassing at the end. It starts with no trespassing. We can't trespass on this guy's life. We end and it's still there, and we're locked out of the gates. Right. You know, and I think people sometimes are like, Rosebud at the damn sleigh. I wanted a detective story. You know, I wanted to find out what it was. I wanted to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, a whodunit style.
But they include all that in here, and we show that the way that we tell the story is completely different from how it's been told before. You know, that we have something completely unique. This is, in my opinion, I mean, this is high cinematic art, and we're left with just this. What's the Maldibulge? What's the name of the castle in Fantasia? Somebody will know in the chat. What's the castle in Fantasia? It looks like a castle, and it's a demon sitting on top of a mountain, and he unfurls his wings. You know, is it Maldibulge? Anyway, it looks like this right here. Just this castle in darkness, and it ends up that, you know, people they want that about Rosebud, but it turns out that it's everything and nothing. It's his idyllic childhood. It's the thing he lost. It's this brokenness. It's also tied in with the snow globe. It's the microcosmic world that he could have, and it expands and expands until it's shattered, and it was really nothing. It's also a word on wood, just like he printed words on paper, wood, and then it ends up being just sort of meaningless. You know, this guy has everything in the world, but he has nothing of substance, and nobody really knew him.
Right.
It's great film.
And that's the movie. That's Citizen Kane right there, guys. So smash that like. We're going to read any of the super chats that were sent in. Thank you guys for being here. If you have any questions or comments or want to show some love and support, feel free to send something in right now.
I just thought of the name. It's Chernobog, which is also a name of a demon, but Maldibulge is the name of one of the demons of the abyss in the Dante's Inferno. Chernobog is the name of the thing. But anyway, yeah, great movie, man. Yeah.
You want to read some super chats first?
Yeah, let's get through some super chats here. Oh, look at that. We got a big one right here. So through the super chats, we had, of course, Daniel Patrick. We read that earlier. Thank you to Mela. Really appreciate you, Mela, for gifting a membership. Also, shouts out to Mela out there because I used her music in one of my membership streams the other night. If you go to Mela Forte, go to her channel after this. She's in the chat over on my channel, and she's a long time chat member of ours, of everybody who's been around for a long time, and she makes great down tempo, almost Portishead type of music, and also drum and bass. And she does live streams of making drum and bass. She's great. Shouts out to M Space AV Mav out there who dropped.
There you go. You got gifted a generous super chat.
That's right. $50 super chat right there. Gentlemen, what is your favorite beer or drink of choice? No lean. Damn, we can't talk about that Waukesha. We can't talk about that Purple Rain. No, you go first, sir. What's your favorite?
It depends on the set or setting. I do like a good whiskey. If I'm out and about, I'm very much of a gin and tonic guy. But if I'm at home or I'm relaxed, if we're going to drink liquor, I'm more of a whiskey myself, whiskey and bourbon.
Yeah. I do not drink. I haven't drunk in a long time. I don't drink alcohol. My favorite drink, of course, is the Bull. Yeah. And then if it's not that, then it's that Zip Wow, that Samite Zip Wow. And if not that, then I got the Green Lean right here, Mountain Dew. But no, when I did drink, my favorite drink was, of course, Bushmills, 1608 Ulster. Right, Bushmills, Northern Ireland. And then my favorite, I used to love Guinness, and I used to love that Mad Dog 2020. Damn, that was the good shit. No, but I don't drink. I just drink Red Bull.
Yeah, Scotch is a good one too. Mr. Westford, Scotchy Scotch. I love Scotch. I like Scotch too. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you, Matt. Thank you. Some other super chats here over on Cash App. We had the real John Connor who sends 25 bones, and he says for a lucky new stabbing cap. That's because of the passing away, RIP, passing away of Mr. Orenthal James Simpson, greatest running back in history, 12,000 rushing yards, Heisman Trophy winner, Orenthal James Simpson. It comes from a Norm joke. So thank you for real John Connor. Also, let's see, shouts out to Maddie out there who dropped, let's see, Maddie dropped some money on here somewhere. Maddie dropped 5 bones, I think. Yeah, thanks to Maddie at Digital Minefield. Also, a couple of big ones here on PayPal. Thank you so much. Shouts out to, says great stream on Citizen Kane. Congrats to both. That's $10 from NP. I don't want to dox you here, but in Purcell, let's say that. Say your name here. Thank you so much for that $10. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Thomas Henderson, legend, OG Thomas Henderson, who drops 25 bones on PayPal. Says the name Jedediah means beloved by God, and it is the name Nathan the prophet gives to Solomon the king. Hey, I was right. The wisdom of Jedediah Leland is revealed in the movie, in the declaration of principles. The estrangement of Kane to these principles and to Leland's friendship reflects his descent into corruption. Excellent analysis, so concise. Thank you for that $25, Thomas Henderson.
Damn,
you are
dude,
awesome.
you made the money.
A shouts out to Jason, my homeboy out there, our homeboy who drops 8 bones on PayPal. Thank you so much, Jason. Always there for us. And let's see. I think that's it. Not that that's it. That was a lot. Thank you so much for all that support. Really appreciate you guys. And DPH, what you got?
I need to get some pay piggies like you, bro. Shout out to Thomas Henderson. He sent $25 as well on Streamlabs and said Orson Welles highlighted the emptiness and sterility of wealth and power. For a 27-year-old, he had it figured out early. Brilliant actor and director. No wine before its time, but Orson was a prime vintage from the start. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, thank you, Thomas, for your support, brother. Really appreciate everything you do. And over on the Dono chat, I had one $5 from Blue Skittle, no comment. We had two $5 from David Atlas and Kristen earlier. Thank you for your support. And then we have $5 came in from Both and throws in $5 with a super sticker. Thank you very much, Both and.
Nice.
And David Atlas just gifted a Codal Crew membership. Thank you very much, David Atlas. Welcome, Kate J, to the Codal Crew. Really appreciate you, David, for gifting that. And that looks like that does it on my end. So,
Nice.
guys, that is going to conclude our movie review of Citizen Kane. I think makes sense why it's often considered one of the, if not the greatest film, arguably you could say the greatest American film for sure, but one of the greatest, if not the greatest film of all time. So anything you want to leave with the people before we hop off here, brother?
Yeah, let me leave it for the people here, the special beings out there, the Cotellians, the OG Granola Wokesters, right? The Chad nerds, everybody out there. I want to say I love y'all. Thank you so much for being here. We just hit the 3-hour mark, and I appreciate you, David Patrick Carey, Church of the Eternal Logos, for doing this stream. I think it's important to do things like this. Of course, there's always a lot going on in the world, but we got to look at things through art. You know, God gives us that. So we got to look at those things. And I want to give a special shout out to a few people here, especially Jason, Real John Connor, again. Excuse me, friend of mine. Also shouts out to Jethro and to Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies. Jerry was my inspiration for wanting to do this stream because he did a stream the other night on his channel on the older flicks. He knows all about the old movies. So shouts out to Jerry out there, a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And a special shout out to Rachel Wilson, who just hit 10,000 subscribers on her channel. We love Rachel. We love Andy and Rachel Wilson. Shouts out finally to Jamie and Jay. I can't wait to see Jay's episode with Sam Hyde on Perfect Guy Life. And shouts out to Jamie, who did such an excellent analysis of the eclipse the other day, which was so awesome. So final thought is I'm going to go see what's it called? Civil War, Alex Garland tomorrow. We got to do an analysis of that. I've done the Alex Garland book, The Beach. I've done the movie Men. I've done a bunch of Alex Garland things. I'm looking forward to this. And then tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to a memorial service for one of my friends who unfortunately passed away recently. And I'm looking forward to being there with his twin brother and to some of my old friends. But we live life and we're here. We don't know the time or the place, and then we're gone, and we don't. That's how it goes. And so I pray for the soul of James out there, my friend who passed away. I'm glad that I could be with you guys here tonight to talk about this movie on the eve of that, and I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Absolutely, brother. We love you. We appreciate everything that you do. God bless everybody out there. I wish you all the best, sincerely, and thank you all for the support, both for BLA and myself, and thank you guys for just supporting our work, generally speaking. It takes a lot of work to do the type of content we do, especially with literary reviews like you do, and I typically do a little bit more research-oriented streams, so they take a lot of effort. They take a lot of time to prepare for, and it's just great to see a community that supports what we do, and we really, really appreciate you guys. I know BLA does, and I can speak for both of us. So thank you guys for all the support. Thank you guys for allowing us to do what we love to do, and riff on various topics and kind of utilize whatever little skill sets we have for the benefit of our communities and our people. So thank you guys very much. Thanks. And I'll be back Sunday with a stream on a historical overview of democracy. That's a sponsored stream. So I'll see you all Sunday. So as always, until